We're continuing our conversation with Frank Anthony of Twin Lake, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now Frank, we had talked already in our first round about how you wound up in the military and how you ultimately, after a lot of infantry and more specialized training, wound up becoming a helicopter pilot and a warrant officer and going to Vietnam. Now, when did you arrive in Vietnam?
May of '69.
Okay. And then did you stay a full year there or longer?
I stayed a full year. At the end of the year, they were going to send me back to a training base. I took one look at the orders and went up to the personnel officer at group headquarters. And at that time, back up, Vietnam was not a declared war. So unlike World War II, once you're there, they can't just keep you there.
Right.
It was a hardship tour. And a hardship tour, they can only keep you in there for 1 year. At that time, they were having trouble keeping enough pilots, and they were in the Vietnamization program where they were slowing down the war and trying to turn it over to the Vietnamese. So they had cut back the number of troops they were making back in the States. So they didn't have enough pilots for Vietnam. They had too many of them in the States. So if you extended 6 months to stay over in Vietnam, you could get another 30-day leave and a free R&R. And I was going to do the same thing in another 6 months. And then I'd have 1 year left, and they'd be sending me back to the States, and oh, I'd have an attitude. So I went up there, and I requested to put in the extension, and then the warrant officer came down one day, and he says, "You believe in WOPA?" And that's Warrant Officer Protective Association. And I said, "Yeah." "Let me sit on your orders. There's something in the wind." He says, "You're no lifer." I said, "Get out of here." He says, "Well, there's something, I just want to check out." And he come back, and he put the papers on the desk, and he says, "This is for your 6-month extension." He says, "How'd you like to get out of service early?" I says, "How early?" He says, "Well, do another 6 months." I says, "You mean after this 6 months?" He says, "No. He says, "Do this 6 months, you get out a year and a half early." I said, "What do I have to do?" He says, "Just stay here." "Do I still get my 30-day leave?" "Yeah." "Do I still get my R&R?" "Yeah." "Can the president read it without his glasses?" You know, I'm signing that baby. So I then, instead of serving 3 years after flight school, I served a year and a half, and it was a year and a half straight in Vietnam, which they couldn't make you do. But I knew the unit, and it was pretty good compared to most jobs over there. I wasn't taking potluck. And I was cutting 6 months off staying there and an extra year in the service. And
all right. So you basically finished in Vietnam toward the end of 1970?
December 23rd.
Right. Okay. I'm going to go back now. Now, when you officially served with several different units in Vietnam.
Which is interesting, because a lot of times when they do that, it's just a paperwork shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
You may not even change barracks. In my case, I did, but I didn't leave the artillery hill I was on. I didn't change the people I was working with. My job didn't change in any way, description, or form. But when I first got there, I was assigned a 3rd of the 6th Artillery, which was an interesting unit because they had guns that we no longer had. They had SP-105s, self-propelled 105s, which looked like a small tank.
Yep.
And they used them a lot for what we call hip shoots. They'd take them down the road, and they'd get to a place, and they'd just pull off the side of the highway, circle the guns, and they'd have an armed personnel carrier with them, which would be their forward direction center, FDC. And they'd throw barbed wire out that they were carrying on the tanks. They'd throw barbed wire out around them, and they'd sit there, and that'd kind of keep the enemy on, I don't know, a razor's edge. You'd have to kind of put a dot in a pin in the map and a string and draw a circle and say, now what can they cover they couldn't cover before? What are they going to be doing? Why are they doing this? And those units used to pull a lot of hip shoots.
Okay. Now, as a helicopter pilot, did you work with them in some way?
Oh, yeah. Our unit was different. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was artillery too. In his artillery unit, some of his pilots were directly dedicated to like the intelligence officer. And that's all he flew for, and that's all he did. And our unit, prior to us getting there, it had bird dogs, L-19 fixed wings. And when we got there, they're still allocated the same way. There were 4 helicopters assigned to group, 2 to each battalion. They were allowed a pilot for each aircraft, a mechanic for each aircraft, and a toolbox. That was it. Group put them all together and decided they had an aviation company that was to support everybody. And we did everything from flying the commanders to flying, well, I wrote my mom and told her I was flying ice cream, mail, chaplains, ash and trash. I did, but we also did convoy cover. If we were there, we did the medevacs. We did emergency resupply. Guns had to be repaired or somebody had to be brought back for whatever reason. We went out and got them. If a unit was under attack and stayed that way long enough, or we happened to just be in the area, we'd fly overhead and sometimes we could see what's going on. We'd redirect artillery or move troops or whatever had to be done. I mean, we were basically just an airborne 3/4-ton truck and used for anything and everything.
Okay, and what type of helicopter did you normally fly?
Well, when I first got there, believe it or not, I was flying an OH-23, which was what you see, similar to what you see on MASH.
Yeah, with a big bubble where the pilot is,
It has a piston engine. 23 is different than 13, though. 13 pilot rides on one side, observer rides on the other. 23 pilot rides in the middle, straddling the console. A person can ride on both sides. Later, I flew an OH-58, which is a Bell Ranger, similar to what you see a number of news media people using. I was checked out and trained to fly a Huey, and the OH-58s were brand new. We had 13 of the 20 of them that came to Vietnam. And the Bell Check Rep lived with us. And it was interesting because self-centering bearings didn't, self-lubricating bearings didn't. All kinds of things that the aircraft was supposed to be capable of doing and so on and so forth didn't happen. So these things were under close scrutiny. So from time to time, we'd get a Twix radio teletype message that all our fleet was grounded. And pilots, being pilots, we like to fly. I mean, we don't like combat, but we like to fly. So we'd go over then and fly with the lift units and stuff because, well, we were checked out to fly them. And so then we go fly Hueys. Our group did requisition from up above somewhere at least 1 Huey a day, and we normally got at least 1 lift aircraft a day. Sometimes we got 2 or 3 of them, and those were normally Chinooks or cranes because we had some bases that were totally inaccessible by ground, and everything had to go in by air. I mean, we not only took in food, we took in water tanks, all their ammunition, anything and everything.
Yeah, and artillery ammunition, if you're taking that in, is pretty substantial.
Yeah.
You can't take that in with a Huey.
What most people don't realize is that while artillery's heavy, they quite often go through more of their weight in ammo each day than what the gun weighs. So,
so that's sort of, and so essentially that's the kind of work that you were doing throughout that year and a half. Now, I want to go back. One of the pieces of your story that's interesting, people wouldn't know much about, is you had Vietnamese civilians working for you on these bases. So you're on a base basically at Pleiku or that area?
Yes.
All right. And with that first unit you had, you basically inherited a maid?
I came in first day, and first day they can't use you yet. First off, everybody gets climatized, so they spend a week or 2 climatizing you. And the poor infantry are running and doing other things. And I can't fly yet. First off, I haven't had a check ride, haven't had all my equipment issued, I haven't had my physical. So there's a lot of things that have to happen before I could fly. So they told me just sleep in, and they gave me this room. And basically the barracks is a pole building on a slab, and the outside siding you can actually inside look out and see the ground outside. You look up through the rafters and you can see the steel roofing. And the room's 8 by 8, and I got one all by my lonesome, and they told me, when you wake up in the morning, come on down, we'll get you started. I mean, no sense worrying about getting up early or anything. And so I'm sleeping in, and I'm a fairly light sleeper anyway. And the door opens, and there's this Vietnamese standing in the doorway. And keep in mind now, my room is like 50 to 75 yards from the outside perimeter. And I'm green as grass, don't know anything. So I drew my .45 cock and locked it, and I aimed right at her, hollered, halt. And she did. She froze, statue style, standing right there, and the two of us are in this Mexican standoff until Doc finally hears her. She starts talking, but she's... I have no idea what that said, but anyway, Doc looks around the door casing at me and sees me in there and says, if you shoot her, you'll have to do your own laundry. Oh. She'd been using the room to like put a blanket over a foot locker and iron clothes and stuff like that. And she didn't know there was somebody in there, and I didn't know she was coming in. She ended up being my maid. That was and everybody gets a laundry mark. And I have no idea what it means, but I was number Hockin 10. And they rate everything from 1 to 10, and 10's as bad as you can be. And if you're number 1, that's super. And I started off being number Hockin. She wrote it on the door. I mean, not just my clothes, but she wrote it on my door. So that was my start with her. But it was a relationship that I didn't forget. I had 2 other maids as I was reassigned. You asked me about it. I was reassigned to 52nd Group Headquarters and then to 6th of the 14th. And both those units were on the hill. And both times I got moved to a different barracks. And I ended up with a different maid. And I don't remember much about either one of the other 2. Of course, like I'd said earlier, you know, we're talking 50 years ago. If you'd asked me earlier, I could probably remember them that. But Mai was the first one. And then there were 2 captains going home that didn't pay her. And I cornered them at the O Club the night they were due to leave. And I asked them if they'd paid Mai, and I knew they hadn't. And I asked them to give me the money, and we could buy them a box of soap and a can of shoe polish a month. And when I say pay her, she took our laundry out, washed them. During the monsoons, they took out every piece of leather we had, saddle soaped it and polished it so it didn't grow mold. And if you had one of the rooms had a counter in there with a hot plate and some other stuff, and if I left anything, they took it out, cleaned it, brought it back, put it there. The room got swept out. They changed the linen on the bed. I don't know. But she got $2.50 a month. Yeah, it was 1,000 piastra. That was their money. And we paid them in piastra. They didn't get paid in U.S. They didn't get paid in military pay currency. They got paid in piastra. And that was 1,000 piastra a month. And we weren't allowed to pay them more, and we weren't allowed to give them anything else. They were worried about inflating their economy and causing trouble. So we were limited what we could pay them. They did eat their lunch on the base, and that was provided. But you asked about other personnel. In the mess hall, we had our cooks that were there, but nobody pulled KP. Civilians took care of that. The officers were in the front quarter of the mess hall, in the back quarters where they fixed the meals. Middle section is where all the chairs were, where the enlisted personnel and stuff like that ate. We were in the front, and there was a small square piece of paper laying at your place. You went in, sat down, picked up the pencil, and checked off what was on the menu that you wanted. They come, picked up the paper. They got the food from the kitchen or went through the line or whatever, I don't know, and brought the food up to us. And when we were through eating, we just got up and left, and everything was cleared and cleaned, and that's the way it was. But officers are a little different, too. Our meals aren't free. After you go through flight school and that, you're given a certain amount. Well, first off, you're given so much for your uniforms. That's a one-time thing. And after that, you're required to provide your own uniforms. And food, if you go to the mess hall, you could buy it. And I'm trying to remember what it was at the time, but it was something stupid. It was under $1.50 a day or something. And it was like 35 cents for a meal. And they kept track of it. And it was deducted from your pay. So when you got your pay, it showed how much you paid for meals there. But if you wanted to go to the Oak Club, or if you wanted to fix something in your room, or buy stuff at the PX, it was up to you, because you're pretty much on your own. But officers, again, being a different group too. The guys referred to RHIP, rank has its privilege, and they think it's cool that you can just cut the corners on a lot of these things. But like, it was the officer, the group commander at 6th of the 14th. When I was first up there, he flew me to where I went right through dinner. And I didn't make a whole lot of complaints to him. But then later I let him know that military reg says I'm to get my meals, because you want to keep blood sugar up.
Right.
And that I needed to eat. He told me to go down to the mess hall. I did. The cook promptly run me out. So I went up to the, can't think what you call it. I went up to the main office there. And First Sergeant Top asked me what was wrong. And I told Top, and he, stay here. Hey, I don't want to get nobody in trouble. He says, I'll take care of it. Top went down, and he come back, and he told me, you go down to the mess hall, he'll feed you. I went down to the mess hall, and the cook took me back into the back of the kitchen, opened up the great big doors of the refrigerators, and says, what do you want? I looked at him, and I said, I just want something to eat. I said, you got some C rations? Because they got them by the case. And that's where they're kept. I said, give me some C rations, some Lurps. He took 2 cases of C rations, put them on the counter, took a case of Lurps and put them on the counter. He says, now what do you want to eat? And I said, no, I just take, First Sergeant will skin me alive. He says, what do you want to eat? And I said, what do you got that's quick and easy? And you know, I got in good with the cooks and the supply sergeants, because having been in the military a bit before I went to flight school, those are 2 people you really want to know and to make your life easier. And I've got helicopter rides. So I got adequate trading material, you know. And there's a number of things we're doing where we can take passengers with us. Like, we bring in a VIP, we always call ahead, and their Jeep comes down to pick them up. We had a tanker truck to fill our aircraft. But if you're flying a Huey and it burns a gallon of fuel a minute, you can drain your truck fairly fast. So we'd go over to the Air Force base, or we'd go over to the other side where there was a Army aviation base. We'd fill up there, bring our aircraft back, and then just top it off. At night, we had a mission. Each evening, we'd fly around our base and just keep making circles wider and wider out and look for anything changing or different. And found a lot of interesting things, but a lot of those times I just take my crew chief with me. Well, OH-23, I still got another seat. You want to go and bring your camera? So we do stuff like that, and the guys love going for rides. So many a time I'd go back to my hooch at night, and right by the door would be a brown bag and maybe a regular carton of milk. And I'd look in a brown bag, and here'd be fresh cinnamon rolls, because the night baker would leave them for me. So in a lot of ways, later it turned out to be great. The cook there finally decided he'd start putting meals and put them on top of the baking oven. And I don't know how many times I come in, he'd just take it off and go, oh, you don't want that, it's been here too long. And what else do you want, you know? And I'm going, hey guys, you know, I'm not trying to make work for you. But RHIP, I didn't eat my meals when everybody else did. And I had my share of eating out of cans, and I had my share of missing meals because of a combat situation. But they think it's pretty cool that you just get away with that.
All right. But I suppose this also ties back in with the idea that you had those 2 captains who didn't feel like paying the maid.
Oh, they were going to ditch her, and they weren't going to pay her.
So did you get the money from them?
I did. And I also got the money for the soap and for the shoe polish, and brought it back to her. And she thought that was cool. I don't know how long it took, but it wasn't too long. I became number 1. And my even on the door, the number got changed. I was number 1 now, you know. And she was, her and I became close. She came in one day and she says to me, she says, you know bomulum. And that's their word for butterfly. They don't have a word for playboy, but a butterfly goes from flower to flower, sucking nectar. And it means the same thing to them. And I go, no. And she says, you know, like boys. I says, get out of here. She says, you know Mary. I says, no. She says, you need wife. I said, oh. I couldn't agree more. She says, boys don't know how to pick good wife. He says, you look with eyeballs. You know, he says, good wife got to know how to cook, got to know how to take care of laundry, got to know how to take care of you. Good wife got to come from good family and be trained proper. She says, Vietnam, family pick wife. Says, I get you good wife. Now what do you say? You know, I got to get thinking quick. I said, if you get me good wife, my family lose face. Oh, yeah, okay. You know, so she backed off. But then it was strange. A couple months later, she knows I'm not this butterfly. She knows I'm not a problem. She grabs my arm one night and she says, you come home with me. And she's facing away from me now and she's pulling me. And she says, I make you happy, I take care of you tonight. I got no idea what she's talking about. But it's totally out of character. Mai's married, she's got a couple kids. I don't know what's going on. And she's just pulling me out the door. 4-foot bulldozer. And I yank her back. She turns around and she's just full of tears. I mean, she's just, and I looked at her and she says to me, she says, you promise me you sleep in bunker tonight, you stay safe? It got overcast that night and we took over 40 rockets that night. How she knew, I have no clue. I just don't know. She came in one morning and she says, you fly the Mengying Pass? I said, yeah. Oh, fly high. Buku VC, big gun, very bad. So I'm thinking, I'm sitting in the old man's briefing every morning. Haven't heard anything about it. So right after breakfast, I go over to the intelligence bunker. I mean, I could try to talk to the guy at the mess hall, but if he's doing his job, he ain't going to say anything. He ain't going to talk to me. And I mean, we got these Vietnamese girls going in and out of our, you know, he ain't going to say nothing. So I went over to the bunker, and I went down to the intelligence bunker. They don't know a thing. 2 days later, he cornered me at breakfast, and he says, before you go up for the briefing, stop by, I want to show you something. Quad 50, 2 Quad 50s in the pass in a reinforced company. Took them 48 hours to figure it out. She's telling me. I don't know. At one time, they thought maybe she was a spy. At one time, well, second week I was there, they had a bit of a disruption in the barbed wire one night, and they shot a sapper coming in. Sapper was normally birthday suit or some sort of loincloth, and dragging satchel charges, explosive charges, already set up, and they know where they're going to put them, set the timers and blow them. They attacked one of our outer fire bases one night, and they destroyed over 85% of the guns in the buildings, the structures, the bunkers and stuff. Didn't last very long. And none of the guys, they didn't figure any of them got off the base. We had enough dead bodies, they didn't figure they left. But the guy they got in the barbed wire, when we got him out of there dead, he was our barber at 3rd of the 6th. Another Vietnamese that was on base. So you didn't really know. And they thought, well, maybe Mai was playing both sides towards the middle or something. And I carried what they call an SOI, Signal Operating Instruction. It was on a cord, went around my neck, and like my dog tags, it went with me everywhere I went. And they gave me a phony one. They wanted me to leave it lay around. And I left it on the bed with my dog tags on purpose and went out to go around, because I had to go out of my building, around, outside, and to the back and closer to the barbed wire was where our latrine was. And I went out there to take a shower. I don't know where Mai was, because she wasn't in my room, and I didn't see her. But I don't think I got 3 feet away from my door, heading down the pathway, and she's yelling and hollering at me, and she's got that SOI and dog tags in her hand. And I'm not sure, because my Vietnamese isn't that good, but I don't think she was calling me good names. And she told me this was very bad, and I know do, and I take this, and she was serious about it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the people were often caught between a rock and a hard place in a lot of cases. But
Oh,
It certainly seemed like she was making a point of doing things that actually helped you. Now, another side of this, you talked about you're not being a butterfly. I mean, how common was it for men in your situation to take advantage of the women who worked on the base?
well, in some cases you didn't have to. Give you an example. One night, I got called. I was executive officer of the aviation company, and I got called, and a couple of my enlisted men had got caught downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Now, downtown's off limits, and everything closes up about dark, and they close the gates, put the barbed wire around. You don't get out with a couple of vehicles. Unless you got a couple of vehicles, written orders, machine gun, radios, flak jackets. I mean, it's a jump through a hoop situation. So I got a couple guys in the Jeeps and all that stuff and went down to the MP station. And sure enough, these are a couple of my enlisted men. And they were down at the brothel going to stay all night. So I brought them back and took them down to my air section, and I told the guard that it sounds funny, we had a barbed wire enclosure inside the compound because we don't need people trying to cut across the runway and things. So, and finally I got my guys separated from everybody else's because they're coming from all these different battalions and groups, and got them one building, and they all lived in the one building, and they pulled guard duty on our air section. So if we had a scramble, these guys know what things got to be untied, what we got a big plug one in the air intake's got to come out. They know how to get the aircraft ready for us to go. Also, sometimes when the Viet Cong got on the base, they did things like take a hand grenade, and they would, if it was like ours, theirs weren't, but they used ours from time to time. They would wrap them with duct tape, pull the pin. Now it can't go off because the hammer's being held down. You know, they would then take the fuel cap off, and our fuel caps are quite big, and they would put the hand grenade inside and put the fuel cap back. What we did was we would scratch the fuel cap across to the, and you got to align the scratch and then lock it down. Well, our guys would check immediately to see if they were left in the positions they were supposed to be. And so our guys were on the base, and they pulled guard duty on our airfield instead of on normal guard towers. And I came in, and I told the guard he was sitting in the air section, which is okay. He can sit there part of the time. I told him to get lost. I want to talk to these two enlisted men. And I told him, I says, it's not my standards, my belief and stuff, you know, that's sacred. This is with your wife. You don't go other places. And I told them, I says, they were stupid. And they're looking at me kind of funny like, and I says, you know, you go down to, I forget what they called it. They had a place where it was like a manpower pool, and we could go down there, and the Vietnamese were somewhat screened in things, and you go down and you talk to them. And I says, go down there, find a gal you want for a maid, talk to her. Tell her what you expect. And if you expect to get laid twice a week, tell her, you know, I'm going to get laid twice a week. And if I get sick, if I come up with some strange disease, I mean, you're getting fired. And you lay down the law to them, and they're quite open about stuff like that. I mean, the guys tell me about and I don't know, but a lot of the little whorehouses along one of the roads were little tar paper shacks. I mean, little small places. And they might be separated by about this much. And they'd have windows on the side, and they tell me about the girls talking to each other. Well, the guys are having sex. And going, what? I don't know. I have to take their word for it. Mm-hmm. But they were quite open about stuff, and they say that some of them felt that if they weren't emotionally involved, there was nothing wrong with it. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I never asked never questioned her. But I told these guys, I says, talk to your maid, tell her what you expect, what's going to happen if things mess up or you get sick or getting caught downtown. That's stupid. Mm-hmm. That's just flat stupid. But yeah, it was available. I mean, it was like drugs and other things. Mm-hmm. I mean, enough stuff was available anywhere that doing some of this stuff crazy was just, and you know, being that, well, I'm a Mormon. Mm-hmm. We don't drink coffee. We don't drink tea. We don't drink alcohol. We don't smoke. So when I had the O Club for a while, I don't think the gal that worked behind the counter there, behind the bar there, would have given me a drink if I asked for one. I think I could have threatened her, and she wouldn't give me a drink.
And why wouldn't she have given you a drink?
She knows that's not my beliefs.
Ah, okay, so she would have been.
If something's wrong, you know,
Yeah.
she. We did have an officer that died over there once, and it hit me hard. I don't remember his name. I went to a mobile wall, you know, the Vietnam Wall. I went to one day, and I looked him up, and he's not hard to find. And I went to his name, and the minute I saw the name on the books, I knew it was him. Usually an artillery officer, a young artillery officer, spends first half of his tour in the field. And he's with a unit, and he directs artillery for him out in the field. And this guy was so good with his bush skills and that they kept him with the Vietnamese, South Vietnamese. But every time they got in contact up where we were, these guys would draw back and leave him out there alone. And several times, I remember one night going down and listening to the radio at the air section of him keeping contact with people from a mortar crater. And he was totally surrounded and fighting. And we'd tried twice before that night to get him out. And the aircraft come back like Swiss cheese, and they couldn't get to him. And I mean, we're using gunships to try and run interference for you. And we couldn't get him out. This happened on a couple occasions. He's the same one. Did they want me to relay about Ben Head again?
Yeah.
He's the same one that I was up by Dak To, and we had a staging field between Dak To and Ben Head for what we called FOB missions, flights over the border. We also had a more colorful term for it, but anyway, we would stage there for going over, and Ben Het was right at the tri-border area where Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam come together. And it was a strategic, military strategic location. He was down by the staging field, and he's looking at all this stuff stacked up. And he asked, "What's it doing here?" And he says, "Well, it's supposed to go to Ben Het." "Well, why isn't it at Ben Het?" And being out in the field, you're just disconnected from anything and everything. He didn't know they'd been under siege for months. And they'd been under siege to the point to where we couldn't get anything in or out. We dropped rations on the runway at one point with a C-130. It got so shot up that the wings fell off it before it got back to base. The rations that were dropped were what we call a low-level extraction. They come across the field, they throw a parachute out, the stuff's dragged out the back and dropped on the runway. They couldn't get the stuff off the runway. It rotted on the runway. They loaded up a tank retriever, and a tank retriever is bigger than a tank, and it's more armored. It's got a 12-cylinder diesel engine, and I forget how much horsepower it's got, but it's unbelievable. And this thing can fasten to a tank and drag a tank off the battlefield with no treads. Because it's a common thing to have happen, have a track get blown off a tank, and then it's immobile. It's a sitting pillbox, if you will. And this thing would go out and fasten to that tank and drag it off a battlefield. It's a pretty substantial piece of hardware. They let one of them get right in the gate going into Ben Het and then blew it up. Nothing got in or out of that place, nothing. Well, he takes a look at all these supplies and he says, "Well, we can't have that." He wanders off and he comes back later and he got a Jeep from somewhere. I have no idea where he got it from. And he just puts a bunch of whole supplies on the Jeep. Well, they need this, they need that, they need this. And all he's got is M16. And it's leaning against the dash. And he takes off. He drove all the way down to Ben Het, down the road that goes, one road goes there, drove down, drove around the tank retriever and into the base, delivers the supplies. And they go, "Well, we'll find you a place to stay. You know, we're going to stay. I've got to go on patrol tomorrow." He jumped back in the Jeep and drove all the way back. Nobody even shot at him.
Right.
And the only thing I can assume is some things happen in combat It's like playing, it's like counting coup. And they happen from time to time, and when you see them, you just sort of stand there and go.
Right. Yeah, I think we did have that particular piece of story in the previous round. But this is a fellow who would go off, and he would go across into Laos or into Cambodia as part of what he would do.
He was typically working with just the Vietnamese on our side.
Okay.
And one night, again, they left him. And for a while we had contact, and for a while we were trying to get at him, but he was in a heavy jungle over there can get triple canopy. And I don't know if people here know what I'm talking about, but the trees will grow up and they'll make a complete canopy. And then they'll grow up and they'll make another complete canopy. And they'll grow up and they'll make another. And they get so thick that we've had aircraft that have had extreme difficulty have landed in the top of the canopy and stayed there. I don't know if you can imagine it. And then they drop a 160-foot rope that we sometimes use where the guys rappel out, or we do string jobs across the border to pick people out. And they've rappelled down and not been able to get to the ground yet. Just amazing. Anyway, he was in one of those kind of areas. We couldn't fly in to get him. We couldn't, it was difficult doing anything. Then battery runs out. You run out of contact with them. I don't remember now whether it was days or weeks later, but they found him alongside the Maid Road, and they had broken his arms and bent him around and nailed his arms to the tree. Don't know if that was before he was dead or after he was dead. His privates were cut off and they were stuffed in his mouth. Don't know if he bled to death or suffocated, but he didn't go easy. And I went down to the bunker that was behind my hooch and threw open the door, and it's the first time there wasn't a bit of liquor in there. And I went up to the officers club, and I was intent. I was having a hard time with that one. And I came in, and I don't remember the gal who ran the bar for me, but she popped a knee-high orange and just slid it down the bar. And that sort of short-circuited me. And she somewhat saved me, because I was going to tie one on. He was way past his 6 months. Why they kept him out there, I don't know. I know the commander from that unit. I don't think he's the type to hold a grudge. I don't know if they had nobody else to put out there and he was the best skilled. So you put him out there figuring he's less likely to get, don't know. I mean, I think I told you before I was covering the convoy and the convoy stopped. He ran into the jungle and I'm looking going, what? And I'm flying convoy cover. And I'm going, what's going on down there? Because he went into the jungle all by his lonesome. He come out later and he threw something in the back of the Jeep. And of course, I'm 1,000 feet over the top of the convoy. I can't tell precisely what he did, but he threw something back of the Jeep. I've got pictures at home of him standing in front of the mess hall with the gals you're talking about. And he's got a snake that was about this big around. He's holding both arms like this, and the thing's just barely touching the ground on both sides. He'd shot it behind the head twice with his .45 and brought it back and put it in the Jeep and brought it back. I don't know. That was something that was important to him. But you get a little loose. I mean, you've been in combat long enough. When you're first there, you're scared to death. And after a while, you just do. And he felt safe enough, I guess, at the time with the situation. He just went and got the snake.
You know, you talked about him staying out in the field. It may be that he wanted to be in the field.
I don't know. If he'd been one of my men and I had the men to spare, I don't care if he wants to or not. He'd done his time.
Right.
And you can play the numbers, and that's exactly what I talk about at times. You can play the numbers, and if you play them long enough, your number's up. And you can get away with anything for a while. You know, there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there's no old, bold pilots.
Okay. Now, another dimension of the Vietnam War that was going on while you were there was the incursion into Cambodia.
Yeah.
We officially did go in and sent substantial numbers of troops in. Did that affect what you did, or what was your connection to that?
Well, yeah, they're going the artillery needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we got 8 inches and 175s, and these are big guns like you'd find on a battleship.
Right.
And these things were actually mounted on track vehicles. The military didn't have any more of them anymore. They use rockets in their places. But they were in the border. Now, an 8 inch is real accurate, but it's not as long. A 175 is real long, and we used to joke, you're lucky to get 2 of them in the same grid square. Because the further out you shoot, the more difficult it is to be accurate with them. So yeah, we were moving. We moved some of the 105s, the SP 105s up the border. We brought in some 155s and airlifted them in when we could. But that was during part of the monsoon season, and it was bad. And trying to even navigate those roads is bad. And we had a section between Camp Inari, that was where 4th Infantry Division was. It was between Pleiku and the border. And then there was a couple other Special Forces camps, and the end of that road was Plagerang. And that was an area where they kicked off to go in. And a lot of these Special Forces camps have airstrips and stuff by them left over from the French. And, well, again, like I said, I had a fairly cushy job. The infantry goes first. The artillery's behind them somewhere shooting. It'd be nice if you had a conventional war where you had a front line, because in Vietnam there's no front lines. And they pop up anywhere and everywhere, and there's really no front line. And that road was known somewhat to be full of ambushes, and we were covering it. And I'm covering a convoy going, and the weather was bad. I told my crew chief to get a machine gun, and I normally didn't. I was flying 58 at the time, and it can carry 4 people. And I had an aerial observer in the front, and he'd had some stick time. He could get us down to one big chunk, I think, if things required. Crew chief for the back, and he normally had a monkey harness and a short strap that went back, and he clipped into the seat belt so he couldn't fall out. And he had a machine gun that hung on a bungee cord from the doorway.
Yep.
Doors were off. And then he asked me if his roommate could go, because I didn't ask anybody else. And he says, you need another gunner. Okay, but I didn't normally fly with anybody else. So he took another gunner, and we were flying ahead of the convoy, trying to deliberately draw fire. Low, slow, stupid, whatever. But the weather was so bad, I couldn't get high anyway. I mean, there were times I couldn't see my own rotor blades. And I'm hugging the treetops. It got so bad for a while, I actually hovered in the convoy. At one point, I heard dust-off call off Plagerang, and they were coming south. And I called them on the radio, and I said, you got wheels on that thing? Because the weather was that bad, you know. And he says, what are you doing? I says, well, I'm covering a convoy, and I'm coming up the other side. So I asked him if he was on his side of the road, because it was kind of a joke. IFR is instrument flight rules. And in Vietnam, we used to say IFR is I follow roads. And in bad weather, we'd get low to the roads and hug the roads. And he was coming down, I was going up. I made sure he was on his side, he made sure I was on my side. Normally in combat, we flew with the lights off, even at night. So if you look outside here and you see an aircraft go by and you see the little lights on the outside and you see the rotating beacons, we had them off. We turned them on. And we even turned our marker lights on flash. So the lights that are on the outside of the aircraft are flashing. I got 2 rotating beacons on my aircraft, and they're both going. And in that area, right in the middle, was a plantation. I don't remember now, it was a rubber or a tea plantation. And on one side is the house, and on one side was manufacturing and whatever. And they ran a power line, because the generator was only on one side of the road, so they ran a power line across. And that's kind of rare in the jungles to find power lines, you know. I mean, Vietnam didn't have a lot of power lines. And so I asked him to call the power line. He said he would. And we had radio contact, and we were on our own sides of the road, and we had all the beacons on and lights, and we both called the power line at the same time. And we got extra people in the aircraft, so it ain't just me trying to fly and look where I'm going and look to see if I can see him. And we got other people. We didn't see each other. So that's what you get. And that was a day when breakfast to dinner was sea rations, if I had a chance. Good share of that day, I set the aircraft down, they refueled it running. You hot refueled and right back up and going. And didn't have any time to stay or do anything. Or you got personal business to do, you relieve yourself under the tailboom of the aircraft. You ain't got time to run anyplace else. It was a busy day.
Now, when you were going into Cambodia, was that more dangerous than flying over Vietnam? Or was it basically the same?
You never know. I mean, I like to say yes, because the president was stupid enough to tell them we're coming, first off. So they knew what we were going to be doing. But they also then could know we were coming and pull out whatever they want, pull their troops back, go to the jungle and stay put. A lot of times we'd make contact with them and they'd split up into 3-man units and just disappear. There were times where we thought we had them surrounded, literally surrounded, cordoned off in the jungle. You swear they couldn't go anywhere. And they'd break down into 3-man units and infiltrate right between our lines and be gone, just evaporate. Before I got there, when they went in and fought at Imperial Palace. I can't think the name of the city. The Tet Offensive.
So that was Hue.
At Hue.
Yeah.
They were already prepared and fought in the city, and they retreated all the way to the Imperial Palace. And you'd swear they were there, they can't get out, they can't go anywhere. Next day they were gone. And that's one of the big question marks of the war. How'd they get out of there? Don't know. They had them cornered into the Imperial Palace. Place was surrounded, no place out. Next day they're gone. But the Viet Cong, for the most part, everything was planned out in great detail. They didn't do many things off the cuff or rapid reaction forces they didn't have. They planned everything out in great detail, including leaving. And a lot of times things could be quiet for months, and then you could have a battle that lasted 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, and then just as quiet. So you didn't know. I mean, when I first got to Vietnam, we got shelled 3-4 times a week. Sometimes we were probed. Sometimes there were people who actually got on the perimeter. And then I remember after a few months, we went for a month or two and nothing. Absolutely nothing. And we're wondering, what are they saving it all for? What's going to happen? And then we started thinking, how many of our people, because this was a different war and we didn't go over as a solid unit, we didn't go back as a solid unit, people rotated in and rotated out. How many of our people were brand new now? How many of our people hadn't actually been under fire and been tested? How many of you don't know what they're going to do? And it got kind of a eerie feeling because you didn't know if they were going to have an all-out offensive on you, or if maybe because of Tet, they'd run out of their reserve and they didn't have any fuel in the tank to keep fighting with, or you just didn't know. And you're sitting there. So your question's a good one, because there were times where they popped up, like that fire base between Dragon Mountain and Campanari. They hit that one, and it was one evening. They came through the South Vietnamese section of that base and got into our base, and with charges, disabled 85% of the artillery we had there, blew up 85% of the bunkers. We were shooting them run around inside the compound. I mentioned Ben Head. Within minutes of them starting the attack, there were people running around with satchel charges inside the base. They'd tunneled underneath the barbed wire. We didn't know they were even there or done that. And all of a sudden they're just there. And you got to fight. So You know, I'd heard soldiers from World War II talk about hurry up and wait. And you don't know when they're going to start a fight. You don't know when the fight's going to end. You don't know. In Vietnam, there was no front line. Leastwise in World War II, if they came through like the Battle of the Bulge, when they started it, you knew they were there. You knew they were moving troops to fight it. Vietnam, you were fighting with what you had for the most part. I mean, you might bring in Puff the Magic Dragon, and you might bring in an aerial gunship, call her Camp Holloway and get some of our helicopter gunships to come shoot it up if things are getting bad. There were some rapid reaction units we had, but most of them were for the field. You get hit and you're a convoy. You're fighting your way out of the mess. And normally they wouldn't stay there long enough for you to bring in reinforcements or do anything. So my take on, was it more dangerous to go into Cambodia? I don't think so. I think we somewhat caught them off guard. I don't think they were prepared or thinking over there offensively, and I don't think their bases were really set up that offensive. The people we put over the border prior to that were all small patrols for the most part, LRP patrols, long-range recon patrols. There were not a lot of men. When they encountered a lot of enemy, they used artillery, they used airstrikes, they used whatever. They didn't try and engage them themselves. They just ghosted away into the jungle.
Now, would you go in and get those people? Or would they just get themselves out?
Yeah. And there were times we went in and got them when they were in contact. And a couple times we did what we call a string job. They couldn't get to an open LZ, landing zone. Found a hole in the jungle, dropped a 160-foot rope and hoped it reached the ground. They had like a jumpsuit, carabine around the back, they'd hook in. The most we could pull with a Huey out was 3. It depends. If they weren't too high in the mountains and the air wasn't too hot that day, we could maybe take 4 and bring them straight up out of there and then fly them someplace to where we could get to an LZ. And maybe you want to skip the first one. They might be figuring you might land there. Go to the second one and set them down, then get them in the aircraft. A couple times close to there, we'd seen guys come all the way back to that staging field by Dak To. But most of those guys we were picking up over the border were mercenaries, CIA, full-time CIA, or they were, like I said, mercenaries, which might be made up of a little bit of everything, Korean, Australian, Americans, but not soldiers.
Okay. And then would they also use some of the non-Vietnamese Vietnamese, like Hmong Chinese or Montagnards or?
Yep. Some units were Vietnamese. Some of them functioned with Vietnamese over there. It depended on what they were doing. I mean, if you were going to take a prisoner, it was nice if you could talk to them. But for the most part, LRP patrols didn't take prisoners. What are you going to do with them? And you don't have that much firepower to begin with. And if you got a guy or two watching a prisoner, he's a guy or two that can't shoot. And everybody's got to be able to. A lot of our medics over there decided after they'd been there a while, the Viet Cong didn't care whether they were medics. Well, medic was a high priority target for them. A lot of them started carrying weapons.
Right.
I know a couple of them decided, nope, things get that bad, there'll be enough loose weapons laying around anyway. I don't need to carry one. Just depends. I mean, like I said, combat's got a habit of changing you. And at one time, I think, I don't know if you asked me or I just brought it up, but a hero is something I'd been asked after I got back a lot. What's a hero? And the more I thought about it, I finally came up with, I know what a hero is now. A hero is a person whose character is so developed that when the situation comes, he doesn't think. He just knows what's got to be done and he does it. If you think of a kid in the street, a car's coming, you don't look at the car and calculate the distance and figure, you know, can I get the kid? You run and grab the kid, and if everything goes right, you roll off the other side of the road and you got the kid and it turned out fine. Every one of the guys I know that I would call a hero, whether they got the medals for it or not, all of them have said later, it's the dumbest thing I ever did. You know, if I'd have thought about it, I wouldn't have done it. But they just knew it had to be done. They knew they were the person to do it. They were, I always talk about the right place at the wrong time. And they just do it. Combat's got a habit of doing that. You sort of build up a, I don't know what you'd call it. When you get there, it's like you're scared of everything, and after a while, you don't get that feeling of invincibility because you know you're not. But you sort of build up a tolerance for it. I don't know how you explain it. But you just know. I mean, if you'd have told me when I got to Vietnam I'd run through a mortar attack, I'd have laughed at you. Ain't no way, dude. I'm going to stay under my bed against the wall where the sandbags are. I'm going down to my bunker. I'm going. No, if the stars are out, I can get off the ground. That aircraft's getting airborne. And the sooner I can get airborne, the sooner I can shoot back at what's shooting at us, the less people are in danger. You got a job to do, and you just go do it. And you don't think about it. I mean, first time you probably think about it. Second or third time, you don't give much thought. I was talking with some guys at a powwow, sponsored by the Purple Heart Association, powwow up in White Cloud this last weekend, and we were commenting about stuff like that. And 4th of July, I don't get along very well with. Bottle rockets go off, and I am subconsciously counting how long I can run before the round impacts in our base. And the thing is, the bottle rockets on the 4th of July never land. And I'm just still counting. You know, it just...
All right. We got a lot of different stories here to kind of catch up on and plug in, which is actually
You're going to
great.
have to be doing a bunch of editing.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, all we have, we're creating material. Well, people may watch this in WKTV. We're primarily making this for the archive, and as long as we got it, we're good. Okay. Now, we have a number of other, we've talked some about dealing with the civilian population, the Vietnamese, and so forth. And there's another number of pieces of your story that relate to that I want to bring in. One of them has to do, some of it has to do with dealing with the Montagnards. I think there was a point when you had to deal with a mother and her baby. What was that story?
It was during the monsoons, and they had brought a Montagnard woman, I say this, but she was maybe 14, with her child into 71st Evac Hospital. The child was jaundice, and they were trying to help. They got it into the hospital and determined there was nothing they could do, and the baby was going to die. Montagnard religion teaches that if they die away from home, their spirit wanders forever trying to find home. Due to the monsoons, they couldn't get anybody to get her back, and taking the road takes a long time. And even during the monsoons, when things get bad enough, the MPs and everything are pulled off the road, and she'd have to ride her water buffalo back out there. Since I flew the chaplains, and I worked with the chaplains a bunch, I got a call at the aviation section at Artillery Hill, and they asked me if I could take her back out to her village. And that was at a Special Forces camp. And I called the Air Force Base and checked with the weather people, and there really wasn't enough time. Now this is going to sound churchy, but this is part of the story. I felt by the Spirit that I could do it, and I just knew. But I was short time on both ends of the window. They told me within plus or minus 5 minutes when they thought the weather would stop, and within plus or 5 minutes when they thought the weather was going to start again. So I got an aircraft, and I went over 71st Evac and landed on their pad. Of course, I say landed, you know, the engine's still running and everything's going, and they bring her out and they put her in the, I'd taken the controls out and everything on the other side. There's only me and the 58, and they put her in the co-pilot seat on the other side. And I said to them, I said, does she speak Vietnamese? They said, no. Does she speak English? No. Does anybody here speak Montagnard? No. Does she know where she's going? Does she know what we're doing? No. Oh. Now, these people, they're like our Indians. They live in the jungle. About the only thing you'll find in their village that's man-made, maybe from outside their village, is a machete. And a lot of them are homegrown and made. If the chaplains haven't got to them, missionaries haven't been there, the women are bare-chested. They got a piece of cloth wrapped around their waist that goes down to about mid-calf. The guys wear a loincloth. That's it. Kids to about age 14 run around naked as a jaybird. And they're very, very moral people. Put her in the front seat, and you got to keep in mind, I'm a military pilot, and I'm in a flight suit, and I got long sleeves and gloves, and things are Velcroed, and Velcroed down to my boots, and I've got sunglasses on and my helmet and visor down, and I look like some sort of big bug sitting in the front of this thing. Now, she's in the front of this, and you got all the plexiglass so you can see. And my aircraft does about 125 miles an hour ground speed. And where we're at 71st Evac, I can't get airborne out of there because we're under the approach path for the Air Force Base, which is usually the hospitals are built right next to the Air Force Base for obvious reasons for evacuation and that. So I come out of there and I'm low leveling, and I get out of part of Pleiku, but I'm still on the end of Pleiku Air Base's runway. So I'm low leveling across the rice paddies and stuff out there. And she sees my hand on the collective over here, my left hand, and she looks over there and she grabs it. I guess it looks like something worthwhile holding on to. Well, it controls the pitch in the main rotor blades, determines basically how high you are, and I'm about 6 inches off the rice. And she's holding on to this, and I'm looking at her and looking at this and looking at this and looking at her. Of course, I got my sunglasses on, she can't see my eyes, and I'm trying to let her know that, no, she got to let go of that. And she finally does, and I smile at her. And then I'm going out a ways from the base, and I notice a sucker hole. And a sucker hole is, in bad weather, if you get into one of them, you start up and think you can go over the top of it, and it closes in on you. And I'm not worried about it closing in on me because I'm instrument rated, and I can just jump on the instruments, and I know where the tops are. So I can come out on top. So I get in this thing, and I corkscrew up to the top, and I'm over the top, and I'm looking at this huge cotton field. I can't see anything for orientation, absolutely nothing. So I start calling a few places, and I get on their radar. And I'm printed on about 3 different radars. And I tell them where I want to go, and they're radar vectoring me. So I'm talking to them and working my way out there, and I get over the top of the base where she lives, and they tell me I'm there. And lo and behold, another sucker hole opens up. And I corkscrew down through and drop her off. And then I come out of there, corkscrew back up, and start heading back. And again, can't recognize anything, can't see anything. Of course, it wasn't raining when I was down there either, so it's fine. But the tops can build real fast. The weather can go down the drain in minutes. And I'm coming back, and now it's just a matter of time and distance and heading. You just, and as I'm going along fat, dumb, and happy, all of a sudden my FM radio goes beep, 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 and I know I'm in a world of trouble. At that time, the guys, the pilots, were getting fuzzbusters from the States. And I just got printed by ground defense radar. And it swept me, and my FM radio will pop then, and that's what I heard. And then it'll come back and pop me again. And then they come in and they narrowed in, they locked on me. And I'm expecting to get shot any minute. And instead of just sitting there doing nothing, my first response when I got swept and then got swept again before they even locked onto me, I jumped on my radio and I told the first radar place, mark me on your screen. And they did, with a grease pencil. And I'm calling the next one, mark me on the screen. I ain't even telling them why, just tell them mark me. And they're marking me on the screen. And then I come back and I tell each one of them as I can, because each one of them's on a different frequency, that has just been printed by ground defense radar and I'm expecting to get shot at. And I don't get shot at. I don't know why. I just keep going. Next thing I know, they're telling me that I'm over Artillery Hill. That's 52nd Group Headquarters in Pleiku. I can't see a thing. And I'm getting ready to go over to Pleiku and shoot an instrument approach into the Air Force Base. And about then, sucker hole opens up. And a corkscrew right on down through, and I managed to end the corkscrew right on the end of our runway. How fortuitous. Right at the end of our runway. And I get on the runway, and I'm at 3 foot standard and start hovering down the runway, and the heavens open up. And I can't even see to hover down our runway. I look sideways, and I can't even, through the open door on the other side of the aircraft, even see the dividing line down the middle of the runway. I look through the chin bubble, and I can see part of the stones and that in the pentaprime on the asphalt, and I set the aircraft down on the ground and shut it off, and they come out with ground handling equipment. They had to put it in the revetment. That happened to me on, this is one, but I went out for another guy who had FUO, fever of unknown origin, and the same sort of thing happened. And that one, I was flying towards a wall. And you just look at it, here's this black wall, ground to 60,000+ feet. And if, that may not mean anything, but over 12,000, we can't operate for over a half hour without oxygen. What's Everest, 29,000?
Yeah. So
60,000+ feet. Wall. And I'm flying straight towards the wall. And same feeling again. Knew I could get out, knew I could get back, knew it would be okay. Matter of fact, my crew chief at that time says to me, he was flying with me, I cranked up the aircraft. He says, where are you going? I told him. He says, well, I'm coming with you. I said, you're crazier than a March hare. He says, no. He says, you get in that stuff. He says, at least you'll need somebody to change radios. He says, I can read some of the instruments for you. I can help you out in the cockpit. I can cut down your workload. I says, you want to? I'm getting goosebumps. I wouldn't ask him to go. I wouldn't put him in that situation. And yet I knew I could get there and get back safely, and I'd do it for somebody else, but I wouldn't put anybody else's life in that situation. And he insisted going with me. And again, we're painted on everybody's radar, nothing to do but time, distance, and heading. And he looked at me and he says, what are you thinking, sir? I says, you don't want to know. He says, yes, I do. I says, well, I says, don't jump up and shoot me right away. Hear me out totally. He says, okay. I was thinking it'd be a great day to die. He says, what? Well, you know, I got a T-shirt that says, you can't take this life too seriously. No one gets out alive. You got to go. I get into that thing, I'm going to be hit like a bug on them with a fly swatter. You're not going to know what happened. You're not going to suffer. You're not going to go through long pain. You're not going to... Is there a better way to go trying to save a fellow man? You know, I mean, it was... and I wasn't trying to be suicidal. And I wasn't trying to be a hero. And I just... If it was me out there, I'd want somebody to come. If it was my brother, I'd want... And he was my brother. You'd want somebody to come. And I thought I could do it. And we did, but that was another one. I got to the runway, and it was like I flew into the ocean. I mean, that's just what it was like. It was like I was underwater. It was raining that. It would rain so hard, you could stand on one side of the runway and couldn't see the other side.
Have you ever experienced physical conditions like that since you got back to the States? I mean, is a really, really bad rainstorm that we might have here similar to that, or
no?
This is a whole other level.
No. Okay. I've seen clouds at times that looked as menacing, and you have to understand, I am a ham radio operator, I do work with Stormwatch, and we certify the weather before the TV stations, and that can give it out to the public. I have been in, I haven't been in the tornado. I've been close enough that I think if I threw a baseball, it'd throw it back at me. But I'm also on the downside track. It's past me. I'm coming in from the side and going behind it. But no, I've never seen rain like I mentioned at one time, and one of the stories my wife wants me to tell you is we had the aircraft grounded for over 21 days, flying nothing. It didn't even go to a drizzle. It just steadily poured for 21 days. And the guys came in that morning and they said, "You read the scriptures?" I said, "Well, yeah, a little bit." "How long did it take the Lord to flood the earth?" I said, "Well, we got a little while." Besides that, he opened up the earth and the water flushed out. And I said, we got a little bit. And a little while later that afternoon, an aircraft landed on our field. And it was our sister unit from down in Phuket. Well, in Vietnam, the country's long and narrow. And when you get by the coast, you have the lowlands. You get up in the highlands where you got the highlands. And there's two passes to get in there. You got the Mang Yang Pass before you get to An Khe, and then you got the An Khe Pass dropping down into the lowlands. And this fool had come up and low-leveled through both passes, and then low-leveled the road all the way into us. And we had nothing flying. And neither was the Air Force Base. As a matter of fact, my guys came in that morning and were placing bets in the back room. Was I going to cave? Was I going to give in to these commanders? And I was literally telling them that if they want to go someplace, they could take their Jeep. Well, remember I told you the MPs didn't go out and secure the roadway?
Right.
Well, if he's going to take his Jeep, he better take the tanks with him and something else. It was that bad. And I tried talking to this young W1, and that's first rank coming off flight school.
Right.
So they got W1, W2, W3, W4 at that time. And I was a W2. And he literally told me I was yellow. He literally told me I was an old man and I needed to turn in my wings. And one of my biggest regrets from Vietnam is I didn't send a mechanic out to disable his aircraft. I told him if he'd stayed, I'd take the flak. I'd say I forbid him to take off. All he's got to do is say the runways, the airport's closed, he couldn't leave.
Yeah.
He wouldn't listen. I told him at least call Mang Yang Pass to let us know he was there, because once he goes through, we can't maintain radio contact with him. He went out, and we didn't hear anything, and we didn't hear anything, and we didn't hear anything. Phone rang, picked it up. Guard post in the pass. There's a OH-58 tail boom there and a fire. Do we have anything flying? Because we got the 58s. 13 of 20 of them that are in all of Vietnam. I immediately called group headquarters and told the old man there was a 58 down and burning in the Mang Yang Pass. I was going to the crash site. If he wanted to go, be here in 5 minutes. I wasn't going to wait for him. We readied the aircraft and I left. I flew and landed at the crash site. Later, when we recovered the stuff there, they put everything but the tail boom in 2 bushel baskets. They hit so hard, they pulled the seatbelt anchors right out of the floor. Near as they can tell, they landed at an artillery fire base just before the pass, and they picked up some paint there. The aircraft was full. There was the commander, his first sergeant, the pilot, and somebody else they picked up. The people in the pass said they'd saw him open the door and throw something out. There was paint on a few of the pieces they picked up and put in. They suspected that somebody may have been smoking and set the paint on fire, and he may have thrown the can of paint out the door. Don't know. But if you think of a river going a creek or a river going down through rapids in a rapid area. You know how you see the white water and you see the bubbling, and the passes are like that. And they suspect that the pilot's attention was diverted and that he may have been trying to circle in the pass and got caught in a downdraft, and he just literally flew into the side of the pass.
Mhm.
I came up off of there where he had crashed, turned around, and was going back and located what looked like another crash site. Reported it, and they found a crash site of an 086 that had went down a little over a year ago. Identified that by the pistol and by the dog tags.
Mhm.
And that one had just disappeared. I was flying back to our base, and the group commander with me says, "You're getting kind of short." I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "When are you going to quit flying?" I said, 7 days before I'm due to leave like everybody else. He says, "No." He says, "You're grounded now." I says, "What?" He says, "You're grounded now." I says, "You want to take the controls?" He says, "No, no, when we get to the base, you're grounded." He wouldn't even let me start an aircraft up on the pad. He wouldn't let me do anything. He wouldn't let me even get near the aviation section. 23 days before I was due to leave.
Mhm.
The longest time I spent in Vietnam was the last 23 days. And I mean, I didn't hang out at the pool. I didn't. The warrant officer from personnel called me at one point, and he says, "Would you like to carry some orders?" I says, "What?" He said, "We got some orders, got to go to a couple bases and that." And he says, "They got to be hand carried." He says, "You want to hand carry some orders and some intelligence reports and stuff?" "Yeah." So I go over to the Air Force Base and grab C-130 and fly someplace, and did a little of that before I was due to leave. But long time, long time. You'd rather work. You'd rather get shot at. You'd rather be doing something. But it's my biggest regret. That kid,
Yeah.
he young, dumb, and I know what happened. The commander talked him into flying.
Mhm.
And he didn't have the brass to stand up to him and say no. I mean, I was putting up with it every day. When he landed at our base, our phone went nuts.
Mhm.
Every commander on the base was calling me. Anybody with any rank, company commanders were calling me. "I want to go to," "We're not flying anything." "I heard an aircraft." "We're not flying anything."
Mhm.
You know, he flew out, and my comment to them all the time was, "Who's dying?"
Mhm.
And they'd say, "What?" "No sense flying and trying to risk death if somebody ain't dying. This is not the weather to be flying in."
Mhm.
And I'll fly if somebody's, if there's a good reason. If there's combat-wise, like I said, I did that one piece between Plagerang and Dragon Mountain, opposite sides of the same road, and didn't see the aircraft. Do what's got to be done. But just to go up there and do an inspection, or to go jaw-jack with somebody, or use your radio. Use a voice secure rig. Talk to them. I mean,
Okay. Now, in conjunction sort of with that, being stuck places, there was a point when you got stuck in Dak To, and how did that happen, and what was that?
I was up north. It was later afternoon, flying a commander. And Dak To is a provincial headquarters. That's like saying a township hall.
Mhm.
And that's involving all the local people. But besides that, we have, what do you want to call them, PR people that are there that are working with the locals and stuff. Plus, you never know what's going to be there. But anyway, he had radio contact with him, because I have a variety of radios in my aircraft. And the commander was using one of them and was talking to him at Dak To. Wanted to know if we couldn't land at Dak To. He wanted to talk to some people face to face. I said, okay. So it was on the way. I mean, what's the big, so I landed there. He told me he was going to be, I don't remember now, say it's an hour. So you don't keep the aircraft running. You shut it down, you tie down the rotor blades and stuff like that. I was walking away, and I'd probably got 50 feet from the aircraft when the first mortar shell landed in the ammo supply dump next door. And once that happens, it's a chain reaction. And as I ran back to my aircraft, I heard what sounded like Volkswagen doors flying overhead, and I mean just huge pieces of metal going through the air, and ground shaking, because you're talking about, well, an ammo supply dump. I mean, anything and everything you can think of. And I told you the staging field was just down the road a little bit for over the border. So there, I don't know what all was in that place, but it was going up. I untied the rotor blades and tried to start the aircraft, and it wouldn't start. Well, once you go through a startup procedure, your starter is a small motor. They don't like them build them any bigger than they have to because they're heavy. So you're supposed to let it cool off. And I tried burning it up. I made 3 or 4 attempts to start the aircraft without trying to let it cool. Wouldn't start. Wouldn't start. So I left it. Ran over to Tactical Operations Center there and down the bunker. That place cooked off till about 2 in the morning. And from the minute that supply dump was hit, there were Vietnamese, North Vietnamese again, running around inside that base with satchel charges, throwing them in various bunkers and stuff. So grabbing the Tactical Operations Center probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I knew where that one was. And just being on the ground wasn't a good deal, because normally an explosive, like if you get a mortar coming in, it hits the ground, it detonates, it blows up. So if you're on the ground, you can be fairly close to it and be fairly safe. This stuff's going off and raining down and going everywhere. So I sat in the Tactical Operations Center with a Cocklock 45 watching the door to make sure we didn't get a satchel charge in that bunker for a good share of the evening. And then they told me, well, things calmed down. Yeah, I could still hear everything cooking off, but there was no ground activity and stuff. And they says, we'll get you a place to sleep. And so they took me out, and I think it was a hooch. I don't think it was a tent. And everything's sandbagged up about 3 feet, and the bunk was on the inside of these sandbags, and sticking in the sandbags an RPG. And it hadn't gone off. It just stuck in the sandbags. And I'm looking at that, and the bunk's on the other side. And they said something, yes, I can live with it. And I slept the night with this RPG stuck in the sandbags. Next day, they brought up a maintenance crew from it's 52nd Aviation Headquarters, actually, at Camp Holloway, which is in Pleiku. And they took a look at the bird, and it had a hole in the pilot's windshield, this big around, with it. The piece of shrapnel that made it all tangled in the seat. And the aircraft's a piece of Swiss cheese. The reason it wouldn't start is there's something called an exciter box. And in the car, you have a distributor and spark plug wires. Well, a jet engine that these things have, they're set up in such a way to reduce the backblast, and that's why they have all the stators and vanes to pull the power out of it, to power the main rotor blades. But it's a jet engine nonetheless. Once they're started, you have continuous flame inside. Well, this exciter box goes, and it gives spark to the spark plug that's there that starts that fire in your engine. Piece of shrapnel right in the box. So they wired one on the cowling, or, well, what do you want to call it? It's like the hood of your car opens up to get to the engine. They wired one on there and rerun the wires so I could fly it. But now this seat's not going to be comfortable, and the windshield's got the big old hole in it, and this thing's all full of Swiss cheese, and there's holes in the rotor blades, so when it's flying, it's going. We put sandbags up in the side of the pilot. One thing you don't think about is a helicopter is basically just a box underneath the rotor blades. And if it's not balanced, if it gets off enough, you lose control because the blades only tilt so far. So the helicopter has to be balanced, and if it ain't in balance, you get up and you're just flying some way till you crash. So we had to put sandbags on the pilot's side because I don't have enough lead in my pencil sitting on the co-pilot side to balance it. And they put it on a one-time Red X, and I got to fly it back, and that was interesting, because I walked around that aircraft and wasn't sure. I really wanted to. And the tech rep didn't want to fly with me. But yeah, that's getting stuck at Ben Het. That was
Or was that Duck Toe?
Toe, yeah. Well, Ben Het was down the road from there, but it was Duck Toe.
All right. And you were talking about sandbags, and sandbags, I guess, are ubiquitous in Vietnam. We've got some occasion with...
I got in trouble. Our aviation unit, well, about anywhere where you have a helipad, guys in Vietnam would gather. And if you'd been an R&R and you need to go back to your unit, you'd go to a place where you knew the helicopters came in and out of, and you'd walk up and ask them if they had a seat and ask them if you could ride with them. Well, our little base, we didn't have a separate bunker for people that were just hanging around to fly somewhere. And we had to build a separate bunker, and we had to build a building down there, and because they decided we had an aviation company. Of course, this is during the Vietnamization project, so everything, they weren't big on building anything. Our actual main building was built out of railroad ties, believe it or not. We drilled holes and put rebar through them, and then they made us sandbag it. Wait a minute, this building, we don't need, they made us sandbag it. It's SOP, standard operating procedure. It's got to be sandbagged. So my guys had filled a lot of sandbags, because we had to sandbag this building, and then we had to make a bunker. And now we got to make a bunker and a special shelter for all the people that are waiting to go somewhere. So when I was through doing whatever work I had to do that day, I took off my tunic or my shirt, and I went out there, and I was helping my guys fill sandbags. And one of the commanders come down there, and he caught me filling sandbags. And officers, I guess, ain't supposed to be doing stuff like that. And he's chewing me out. Well, as we mentioned earlier, I'd been through NCO Academy, and I'd been through a bunch of other things. And I don't ask my men to do anything I'm not willing to do. And this almost felt like harassment after a while, filling sandbag after sandbag after sandbag. So I'm filling sandbags with them. If it's important enough for them to do, it's important enough for me to do. Well, I got chewed out, and I got chewed out royally. And after the commander left, I went back to filling sandbags. A few days later, I'm flying this commander, and we're going out to this SP unit I was telling you about that does hip shoots. And they like to fill sandbags and put them actually on the armored vehicles to give them more armor and stuff. Anyway, they were filling sandbags out there, and they'd been on hip shoots enough that their morale was kind of down, kind of like my guys. And I told this commander what I was doing, and got chewed out. Told him I was likely to do it again anyway, and got chewed out. And anyway, we're here, and he's noticing their morale's real down. And being a warrant officer, I'm not in the guy's troop command, and I'm not in line with the enlisted men in there. So a lot of the enlisted men will come up and talk to me when they wouldn't talk to commanders and other things. And I know that their morale was really bad. And the commander come back, and I said something. I says, you know, you're going to have to do something with these guys. I says, their morale is in the tank, really bad. And he looks at me, and he says, you feel like filling sandbags? I says, what? I says, sure. So he and I went over and helped them fill sandbags for the rest of the afternoon. I mean, we were there, I don't know, 3-4 hours. And we wanted to take our tunics off to fill sandbags. And the enlisted men didn't want us to. They wanted us holding the sandbag or running the shovel. And cameras came from everywhere. I never saw so many cameras in my life. And they're taking pictures of us filling sandbags. But it helped. And yeah, that's your sandbag story.
Right. Okay. Now there's another note here with sandbags, bunkers, something about a camouflaged bunker.
Every evening we had a mission where we had to go and fly around our base. And we go out and look and see if anything's going on. Give you an idea what we're looking for. I wrote up a report one night that there was a place out there where they made charcoal. And they had like 5 charcoal kilns. and I noticed that the one kill didn't ever have a burn. And we're looking for things like that. And this night, I had an aerial observer with me. And they have to be colorblind. Now, pilots can't be colorblind. They use light signals from the tower when your radio's out and that. You'd like to know what color it really is.
Yep.
And the aerial observers are colorblind because camouflage does not trick their eyes. They see shine, textures, things like that because they don't see colors. And this was in the dry season, and we start right at our base, and we fly right around the barbed wire. Remember, we fly right over the top of our bunkers, our guard towers. Fly right over the top of our guard towers. And then we keep doing circles further and further out, and further and further out. And we got out far enough, and he said, look at that. Dumb fools, they're building a bunker in the middle of the rice paddy. Well, that time of year, the rice paddies are dry. They're getting ready to harvest the rice and stuff. And he's looking out there, and he's insisting that they're building, and I'm looking, and I can't see anything. I says, you sure? He says, yeah. Have fun. So he calls base and has them shooting. When you shoot with artillery, it's a big gun, it's a big shell, and except for 8 inches, when you get at the edge of their gun fans, they're not real accurate. So he's giving them over and under and left and right because we've adjusted all you normally can, and they're trying to fine-tune things. We ain't hitting anything, and we're burning up a good share of ammunition. I finally said to him, I said, are you sure? He says, yeah. Check fire. I'm going down and take a look. So I go down, and I'm coming across the rice paddy taking a look, and I come to a hover. Sure enough, there was a bunker, and Charlie's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and hard over with a stick and get out of there. We go upstairs, and he takes another fire base now, because this one, we know we're having. So he picks another fire base that's it's got 8 inches at it, but it's a little further away, and the 8 inches are quite accurate. Well, you don't know where the first round's necessarily going to go. So he fires the first round, and we cleared the rice paddies, and we hit the edge of the jungle. We had secondaries to about 300-400 feet in the air. What is this? Fire a couple more, same thing, you know. Give a little dispersion on it, and we got a couple more secondaries. Then we came back to shooting at the bunker that was in the middle of the rice paddy field. And I don't know, it was like a dozen rounds or something. He finally hit it. We had secondaries to 300 feet. Now, I don't know what they had down in there, and if it wasn't for him, we'd have never shot at it. But he's colorblind. He could find it. I couldn't find it. And people always find that interesting. Aerial observer is colorblind? Don't ask him to look at your map and tell you if it's a friendly or an enemy position, because we mark them in red, you know.
Right.
At night, it's difficult, too, because we have red lights in the helicopter. And it's difficult to tell where the enemy is if you mark your map that way. And I've taken some guys out at night. And no, don't mark your enemy position in red. You ain't going to see it in the aircraft.
All right. Another entry we've got in here has to do with the kinds of support you could get from the Air Force, like Puff the Magic Dragon, or how did that work? Or what did you see it being used, I guess, is the...
I was pulling guard duty one night when about 13 miles out, one of our bases was getting hit, and almost like the Aurora Borealis. I mean, it's just lighting up the sky. And from time to time, you see tracers going off and going high in the sky. And they put in an arc light out there, amongst others, B-52 strike. And you could literally feel the ground shake where we were. And then they, at one point during the night, brought in Puff, the Magic Dragon. And when he'd fire, we could hear him. You could see it first, and then later you'd hear him. And it was like a garden hose to the ground, reddish orange. But it looked funny because he's flying around, so the hose looks like it's bent. It can't be that way, but it looks that way from it. And he's shooting at the ground, and you see the tracers bounce off and bounce up, and that far away. And you wouldn't think, I mean, many times when I'm out flying, you'll hear them come across, and they'll say, this is whatever, from 35,000 to ground, impacting in grid square, blah, 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 from now till such and such a Zulu. and they're putting in an arc light strike. And you just can't fathom what it is. But when you're 13 miles away and you can hear the 20 millimeter Vulcan cannon on that thing shooting, and you can see the tracers, and you can feel the ground shake from the arc light, and you wonder, how does anybody survive out there? I mean, Ben Hepp, I talked about it being under siege. I can remember going back after it wasn't under siege, take Doc up to investigate, to check the mess hall to see it's clean and all those kinds of things. And so I'm in and out of there a lot. It looked like moonscape around that place, except on the moon, there's no water in the craters with algae. And there's nothing out there. I mean, you see World War II, there's a dead tree in the no man's zone. I mean, there's nothing out there. And yet we'd arc light it, and as soon as they were through arc lighting, they're back to fighting. How? I've no clue. I mean, I've said to you before, I take my hat off to the Vietnamese. I don't know how the North Vietnamese ever managed to fight, keep up a struggle, resupply their people, even managed to live in the jungle. And I don't know how.
Well, the arc lights did do a lot of damage, and so did the miniguns on the puffs and things.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the puff, was that a propeller plane?
Usually, well, when I was there, they had a mix of old DC-3s. Of course, they've got a number of different nomenclatures. Those and C-130s. Now they're all C-130. Well, it's not true. The Air Force has some C-20s, or the Special Forces have some C-27s now, which is a two-engine job that they use for gunships, and it looks like a C-130. But the one I was observing was a C-130, and he was going to town. I mean, if you can imagine, they mount a 105 semi-automatic gun on the side of that thing and fire it while they're flying around in a circle. I mean, I can't wrap my brain around it. I can't. A Vulcan cannon, 20 millimeter Vulcan cannon, fires somewhere around 6,000 rounds a minute. It's like our minigun going off. It sounds like you're ripping cloth. They mounted one over at Camp Holloway. This was the aviation base I was telling you, Army aviation base on the other side of the hill. They mounted one on top of one of their bunkers, on top of one of their guard towers. When they fired it, the recoil was so bad that the guard tower fell over. It looked like timber. It just tilted over, fell down on the ground. When they first started mounting them on the Cobras when I was there, Cobras were fairly new. We had a lot of Charlie model gunships, but Cobras were fairly new. And they mounted a couple of these Vulcan cannons on the Cobras. They only fired so many rounds at that point, and they were checking the airframes for cracks. And if they fired too many rounds when they were on a gun run, it stopped the aircraft in midair.
Oh, powerful stuff.
They'd come down flying, and because they're on a gun run, they'd fly faster than they're supposed to. They'd get right up to V&E, velocity not to exceed. They'd get right up to the edge of that. Fire the gun, it'd slow them down. Like popping flaps and putting down your landing gear on a fixed wing. It'd just slow them up.
All right. Now, in going into this, you mentioned being on guard duty at night. How commonly were you on guard duty, and how did that work?
I'd have to guess. Seems to me it was every 2 to 3 months, something like that. Because officers always have additional other duties. The thing about guard duty that amazed me, because you don't know what everybody else is doing, and you don't know what everybody else's job is. Because I'd scramble and get my aircraft, I had my gun with me all the time. And I'm going out to outer fire bases. And these guys got their guns with them all the time because they're out there. Most of the guys that were on the base that I was assigned to, Artillery Hill and Pleiku, didn't have their gun. They had a card in their billfold to go to the armory and get their gun. And I'm going, what? And I never realized that till I'm pulling guard duty. And I'm talking with the sergeant of the guard, the guy that's going to be assigned with me for the night, finding out a bit about this. Because if you're an officer and you don't use your sergeant, you're dumber than a box of rocks. And I'm checking with him. So I told him, I said, do me a favor. inspect the troops, do what you want to do, go through all your command and ceremony, and then tell the guys to fall out, and I want them to gather around. And he did that. I got them gathered around, and I says, guys, I know I've been going through the book. I know the SOP. This is one of my first times pulling guard duty. They weren't to unlock their ammo bunker. They have a footlocker in there with their ammo in it, the detonators for the mines that are out in the barbed wire. They weren't to unlock that bunker until they were given orders from either the sergeant of the guard or the officer of the guard. Imagine standing guard duty with an empty gun in Vietnam. And I'm going, no. Anyway, I just told the guys, gather around. I says, I know the SOP. I wouldn't pull guard duty with an empty gun. I don't expect you to. I says, if you fire your gun, there better be a blood trail or a body in the wire, because I won't swing alone. Mm-hmm. Am I clear? They go, yeah. I go, okay. And I then told them to go ahead and go on out. He says, now, I will be up all night. If you have any trouble, you call me. Another thing you get down from my way, I'll go into now. Mm-hmm. I turned to the sergeant, and because I was an officer, I wasn't allowed to do maintenance on the vehicles. So normally the sergeant would be up all night driving the vehicle around, and there was a bunk bed in the command building that I could sleep in. Well, I'm a pilot. If I'm up all night, they can't fly me all day the next day unless it's a combat situation. Mm-hmm. So I told the sergeant, I said, you got one or two choices. You can either stay up all night and drive me, or you can give me the keys and use that cot, and I'll know where you are. He looks at me and he says, you serious, sir? I said, uh-huh. Tomorrow, you'll have to go to work. Up all night and have to go to work all day tomorrow. I'll sleep till noon and then go in. So he gave me the keys. And I don't sneak up on the guys on the perimeter. I tell them I'm coming. I'll be on one perimeter. I'll call the next guard tower and tell them I'm coming. Well, while I was out there, the one tower calls out and they say, we're having trouble. People are coming out from our side up to the tower where they don't belong, and they're harassing them and causing difficulty. I said, okay. I said, now I'm going to come and I'm going to drive up to the bunker, to the guard tower next to you. I'll have my lights off, the whole bit. I'm going to walk over to you then. Challenge me, do whatever you want, but I'm telling you I'm coming. Don't be shooting me. Okay. So I come over there, and I'm on this tower. I'd been there 15, 20 minutes, and sure enough, somebody came over from the NCO club. Mm-hmm. That's where it looked like they came from, over to the tower. And they challenged him, and he responded with some blue, I would say, words, and turned the air kind of blue. And he ignored them and came over and started to climb up the ladder to the bunker. I cocked and locked my .45. Halt. He says, who the blankety blank are you? I said, I'm Warrant Officer Frankie Anthony, officer of the guard. And you want to identify yourself or get shot? And he's just all of a sudden at a complete halt. Just on the ladder there. I'm Sergeant so-and-so. Do you want to live? Yes, sir. I suggest you get the hell off my bunker and don't come back. Yes, sir. And he got down off the bunker and didn't come back. I then unloaded my .45, put the round back in the magazine, put it back in my gun, put it back in my holster. The guys in the bunker said, you just shot him. I said, yep, and you should have too. Mm-hmm. And they looked at me. But I said, you didn't have any ammo, did you? But that's the story Mom wanted me to tell you. He'd come out drunk, and he just knew they weren't supposed to have ammo. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what he thought he was going to do out there, and I don't know what he thought he was doing. But there's three guys on the tower. And if they're paying more attention to him and what's going on, and you know, he could have been the barber. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's dark. This was at night, and there are some people that are still on the base at night. We took them in I don't remember what time the old club closed, but every once in a while I'd go in with the girls in the deuce and a half and take all of them back to the center of town. And there were a number of Vietnamese that were still on the base till quite late at night. And we'd take them back after dark. I don't know who this is. He can tell me the sergeant, but I don't know if this. Now, he did have rather impeccable English for Vietnamese. Usually they had a little trouble with it. So, you know, I don't know if I'd aimed dead center mass or not, but I'd have shot him. No doubt in my mind about that. But
all right. Now you have some of the stuff that happens, I guess, maybe was actually funny, or at least you've had interesting stories.
my wife thinks so. One story she likes is I was going up in I Corps. English was a place that wasn't exactly in the Highlands, and it wasn't exactly in the Delta, but it was up in I Corps, and it was a staging base for a lot of stuff. And they had, from what I could see, I only went there once, and it looked like a hodgepodge of a little bit of everything was in there. And I dropped a commander at a base, and he'd been running around. He was going to stay for a while, and I told him I was going to go up to English and refuel. Otherwise, he's got to go with me when I refuel and what have you. He said, yeah, okay, go. And I'm flying this OH-23, piston slapper, the wooden blades, slow airspeed, 72 knots. Now, keep in mind, you know, the Huey and the 58 I'm flying is doing 125 plus, and 72's kind of slow. And we're the slow stuff. C-130's doing like 300 miles an hour, and you know, just about everything flies faster than we do. And I called English, told them I was 5 miles out for straight in. It's okay, record quarter mile. Roger. Oh, plodding along. 5 miles at 72 knots takes a little bit of time. They call me back. You sure you're landing at English? Affirmative. Be advised, we don't have you in sight. Understand. Roger. Report quarter mile. Skids or landing gear down and locked. Guns cold. Roger. I keep plodding along. Finally, they called me back. Sundown, this is English. You that egg beater on the deck? That's affirmative. By the way, landing gears, or the skids are down and welded, 45's on safety, and magazine's out. I hear him key up the mic, and all I can hear is laughing and guffawing. I'm quarter mile for landing. And I'm 72 knots. You doing 72 knots, quarter mile don't last long. Okay? I can hear him key up the mic again. All I can hear is laughing. They're so broke up, they can't clear me for landing. I finally said, this is Sundown 13. If I'm clear for landing, can you brake squelch twice? I hear click, click. They couldn't talk to me. They were just busted up because I don't know what they thought I had, but yeah, my landing gear is rather down and welded. The only gun I got is my 45 and my survival vest, and magazine's out, safety's on. They just cracked up. Another time I came in and I was landing at Pleiku Air Base, and normally we parallel the runway, and we don't even take the taxiway. We go down the grass alongside the runway and parallel the runway, and down there they had a windsock and some other stuff, and if there's traffic coming in and out, they'd have us hold right there, and it's right across the runway from the main terminal. Then they'd have us turn, and we basically hover across that to the main terminal, set down. And I had dropped off whatever I came in for, and I was calling for clearance to depart. Well, he's giving me clearance tail backwards. Instead of telling me to hover back out and go, he's clearing me to go right over the top of the tower. And this is during the Vietnamization project. And they're trying to get the Vietnamese to do all this stuff. And so I asked him to repeat the departure instructions. He gives me the same instructions, and then he's a little brisk with me, and he says, if you can't make immediate departure, hold flat pitch, C-130 on landing roll. Roger, on the go. And I made max performance takeoff, went straight up, went right over the top of the tower, cleared top of the tower by, I don't know, 3-4 feet, because I'm not, and I'm not worried about it, because right behind them on the Air Force Base is 71st Evac. And I know how to low level out of there and clear their area and the whole bit. And I know Moore had cleared the tower and was getting into 71st Evacs area, and he's got to clear me for QSY, or frequency change. And he comes back and he says, Sundowns play crew tower in the future. If I give you that instructions, you can disregard. Another time I was down at Phuket, and that's on the coast down by Quy Nhon, and we had, again, why they were down there, I don't know, but we had down there 2nd and 72nd, and they had 8 inches and 175s, big guns, sitting right on the edge of the Air Force Base. And I'm going into there, but you got to call the Air Force Base and tell them, because you're under their control zone. I'm flying underneath them. And as I'm coming into land, I hear the tower, and this is Vietnamese, clear an L-19 Bird Dog to take off on runway, say 18, and he clears the C-130 to take off 36. That's opposite ends of the same runway. So somebody calls the tower and advised them that they'd cleared aircraft to take off on the runway opposite ways. And the tower comes back and goes, oh, you all be careful out there, you hear? So the C-130 calls the L-19, says, you take off. So he takes off because his prop wash and that's not going to cause the C-130 any difficulty when he takes off afterwards. But it was funny because just one of those things that happen. And
now was Phuket, was that, there's a place where there was like an orphanage that you went to? Was that there, or Vung Tau? Or?
No, there was a, down at Phuket on the South China Sea, it was south of Phuket, there was a leper colony we used to go to with the chaplains. And that was one of those places like Vung Tau that was really strange, because you got down there and while we left somebody with the aircraft, we never had to really worry about it. Matter of fact, we took a bathing suit and went swimming in the South China Sea because it was right on the water's edge. And we'd go swimming. It was run by the Catholic Church, and it was a place where you could literally eat off the floor. I mean, I never saw a place before or since that was as strack or as clean or as sparkly or as whatever. And we went down there, oh, maybe 2-3 times a month. I took the chaplains down there. You know, first time you go down, you're real skeptical about it because you're not at a military base and you're kind of middle of nowhere and you're kind of whatever. And you got a long ways you can see down the beach. And I mean, it was in a location where you weren't really worried about getting surprised right away. And they never had any trouble with the Viet Cong. And it was a place where, yeah, you let down your guard, but you don't want to let down too far, if that makes sense to you. But no, we'd take our bathing suits down there and go swimming. And that's the only place, other than going for church conferences down there, that I remember actually swimming. And we actually had a swimming pool that they completed while I was there at 52nd Group Headquarters. And even in those 23 days when I was just sitting around, I didn't go swimming. I mean, I don't know why, but just didn't.
Okay. Church conferences, was this for the chaplains or you, or what was that?
Well, I'm a Mormon, and the church has quite a bit of pull. And we had an in-service conference quarterly, and if we wanted to go, they had to let you go. But they're not, your commanders and the people aren't going to tell you. So the chaplains come back to me, and they said, you're LDS? I said, yeah, I'm LDS, Latter-day Saint. Name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Right. So we go by LDS. And he says, you're LDS. I said, yeah. He says, here, you might want to see this. And I took it. Oh! And this was down at Cameron Bay. And he says, you want to go? Yeah. Well, I let my group leader know, and then I had an aircraft at my disposal for one whole day to bring in other LDS I knew that were out at outer bases that wanted to go. Because if they wanted to go, they could go. And I'm going out visiting them when I take these commanders out. Matter of fact, the joke was with some of these commanders, if we need him, we know what bunker he's in. Because I'd go visit some of the other church members out there. And I'd fly them in. We had a C-130 who'd fly us down to Cameron, sit on the tarmac and wait for us. And we'd spend that night and the next day, and then that evening we'd come back. And the C-130, they were that respectful. But you know, you got this dual thing going on again, because they got to let you go, but they don't want to let you go. I mean, when I was in basic and AIT and all that other stuff, I'd want to go to church services, and usually we weren't on base. In our church, we have sacrament service, and then you have Sunday school, and then we have priesthood, so it's 3 hours. And then you got to travel there, and you got to travel back, and I'd get back. And most other Protestant services or Catholic services is maybe an hour, and you got travel time back. So I can't prove I got more KP and more guard duty than other people, but I have my deep suspicions because they didn't want to believe me. But not only that, I don't know if I mentioned to you before, but one of my R&Rs I took in conjunction with an area Far East Servicemen's Conference, which ended up being held at the base of Mount Fuji. And I went there to that conference and then spent the rest of my R&R that time. I went down to Osaka, Japan. The World's Fair was at Osaka. And it was nice enough to go with a couple other church members. So I ain't worried about some guy trying to bring a gal into our hotel room in the middle of the night. And had that happen before. You know, you share a room with Lieutenant so-and-so, and in the middle of the night you got extra company. Didn't have to worry about stuff like that. It was kind of nice. So we went down there and did that. But again, that was something, if you wanted to go, they had to set up your R&Rs and make room for you so you could go. But they weren't telling you. I mean, you had to know about it. And because I was flying the chaplains, because my guys weren't interested, I had insight to some of that stuff. And
Now, that gets me to a couple other questions. One of them is, where would you take the chaplains to, or what would they be doing?
Anything and everything. I mentioned Fire Base 6 before, where we brought in a bulldozer level up top, took them up to Fire Base 6. Matter of fact, that runs into another story down there. That day that I'm referring to, one of the guys came out and says, "Can I take the chaplains?" And I'm looking at him going, "Yeah, what's up?" "Well, they ain't got nothing for me to do. I want the flight time." And okay, so he took my aircraft, and he took the chaplains. And he went up to Fire Base 6 with him, and he's up there for a while. And Fire Base 6, top of this mountain. So the cotton field from the clouds ended up below. And he's looking at the weather, and he goes, "This ain't good." So he goes over to the Protestant chaplain, and he says to him, he says, "If we don't leave here before long, you're going to have a long time to do whatever you want." He says, "The weather's changing, and we got to go." Protestant chaplain says, "Okay, go start up the aircraft. I'll tell Father." So he goes over and he starts up the aircraft, and the Protestant chaplain comes, and they're waiting, and Father ain't coming right away. And finally, Father comes, and he's got a shawl over his neck and a chalice under his arm and some other stuff. And you can tell he didn't put everything back in his box he's got that he travels with. And he's coming back. He says, "Son, puts in his headphones, says, 'Let's go before the Lord finds out what I did to the Mass.'" So they leave, and they're coming back to our base. And we had a one-eyed Charlie. And a one-eyed Charlie is a guy that the Viet Cong would press into service. And they'd give him some dilapidated gun. And they'd give him a couple rounds of ammunition. They'd tell him, "Shoot at the Americans." And they would tell him where to go, and he'd find an empty can, and he'd put his 2 empty cartridges in there that he fired at the Americans. There'd be 2 live ones in there, and that's for to shoot at the next day. And they'd kind of keep an eye on him that way, and he's got to shoot at people. Well, if you got one and you know what he is, you don't return fire. They might get somebody that can actually shoot. Okay? So we had a one-eyed Charlie on our base. And if you get anybody landing, you tell them you got a one-eyed Charlie, and you just, you know. And today he hasn't done his duty. So you kind of know what's going on. Well, all the while I was there, the only aircraft he ever hit was the one coming back in with the chaplains on. And there's a mic button on the floor, and you have one mic boom. You have a control panel that determines what radios you hear and which ones you transmit on. And for some reason, the mic that the Catholic chaplain had was set on FM or Fox mic, and he hit the button. Of course, everybody in the aircraft are monitoring that so they can hear, but he's also now going to transmit to the whole world. And the Protestant chaplain keyed up the mic and looked at the Catholic chaplain, and he says, "The Lord found out." They are sitting on the gas tank in the back, and it has a bulletproof or a ceramic plate on top of it, and that's where the rounds went, into the fuel tank in the back. Both rounds hit the fuel tank, and it's a self-sealing tank, so it dripped a little bit afterwards, but didn't really leak. Matter of fact, they came over there with a crane and a flatbed and picked it up and put it on and took it over to the place to change the tank and that. But that's, now he just did this over the air on a frequency we use for our landing field. So for the next month or two, you get an aircraft coming through, and they're coming out of Pleiku, and they're coming up our way, and they'd call, Artillery Hill, this is Gunslinger 5-5. We'll be coming through your control zone, going up the road to Khartoum. Are we clear? Gunslinger, this is Artillery Hill. Guns are cold, and we have nothing on the field. Feel free. So we're telling them we got no traffic on our airfield, and the guns on top of the hill aren't shooting anywhere. Do your thing, you know. And then they'd come back. By the way, what'd the Lord find out? We'd get that comment for about a month or two afterwards.
All right. Let's see. I guess you had some more things that sort of having to do with sort of civilians and things. You've got one with, let's see, some kids at the rice paddies, or...
I was going up to Ben Het, and a lot of times when we go into a base, you don't go in and just land. You go up and you circle the base first, and then some of the bases, if the place is hot enough or whatever, we'd literally do a little corkscrew in instead of doing a long, shallow landing. And this day I came in and I circled the base, and the Mountain Yard kids were out on the rice paddies. And they're Mountain Yard kids. First off, nobody else is up there, but not a stitch on, and they got these long sticks, and they're like tapping the rice paddy dikes ahead of them. And what in the world are they doing? Now, I've seen the little kids before throw a ball into a minefield and have their dog go get the ball, and they walk where the dog went. They want to go somewhere, and this minefield's in the way. And these kids just grow up with that. And I was thinking, mines on the, but they're too close with the stick, and everything I could think of wasn't making any sense. So what are they doing? And I got in there, and I said something to the special forces that are on this base. And he says, oh, they're hunting for rats. I says, they're what? He says, they're hunting for rats. He says, when a rat runs, if they stir up a rat on the rice paddy dike, they'll beat it with that stick. They'll pick it up and they'll pull the skin apart at the inside of the back legs, and they'll eat it raw out there on the rice paddy dike. Won't bring it back. I said, you gotta be kidding me. He says, no. Well, I remember another time before this, I'd been on the same base, and I was at the mess hall, and I'm looking out the back door, and these Mountain Yard kids are all standing back there, but they're a good distance away from the mess hall, where there's a walkway. And unlike the kids on the street corner here, they're not grab-assing and fooling around and joking and stuff. They're just standing there like there's something really special to see at the mess hall. And I keep looking at them like, what are they doing? So finally I said something to the Special Forces guy in the mess hall. I said, what's with the kids? What's going on? Oh, them? Here, I'll show you. He walks out the back of the mess hall with me, and he said something to him in the Mountain Yard, and all you saw was butts and legs sticking out of trash cans. They were sitting there waiting for permission to get into the trash. My wife earlier was talking with us, and I made the comment that while riding through some of the Vietnamese villages and stuff where I went, on several occasions I had my chauffeur, for lack of a better term, keep asking me, you got your watch? Yeah. Ask me, you got your watch? Wait, yeah. And finally I asked him, what's with this? He said, well, you slow down, you give them the kids candy. He says, they'll take the watch off your arm. I go, oh, okay. The Mountain Yards were just the reverse. We could literally drive a Jeep into the middle of one of their villages and leave it. I mean, we'd lose the gas can driving through these Vietnamese villages off the back of the Jeep. They used to take the gas can off before we went through and put it on the inside. Slow down, they take the gas can off the Jeep. Anyway, you drive one into a Mountain Yard village, you could leave it, come back a month later, they may have washed it and polished it, but it's still sitting there and nothing's removed. You tell them they can have it, and before you're through talking, the thing will be totally disassembled and gone. they know it belongs to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't theirs. They don't touch it. I've seen them injured, and there's an American sitting next to him, and it's monsoon, and he's shaking. And I've seen injured Montagnards lean up against the American to help keep him warm. Never asked, never nothing. And they're hurting. I've seen aircraft that, well, I mentioned going down through the Idrang Valley one day, and I was lead aircraft, a bunch of them behind me, and they got raked with 50 caliber fire. And I followed them all over to the base and that. And we're trying to get guys that are injured off the aircraft and that. And there's only, MASH is nice and everybody comes out, but when you got 4 or 5 aircraft all trying to land and people on them and you're trying to get them all off. And one Montagnard, his jaw was broken off. I mean, it's hanging down like a waddle on a turkey. He ain't even moaning. And he was more interested in trying to help a couple of his other brothers. And I don't know. I just, big difference.
Mm-hmm. Right. You've also got something in here about a particular boy being interested in your helicopter. Was that a Montagnard or Vietnamese? Or?
Little Montagnard kid, and where he got his shirt from, I don't know. And I've got a couple pictures of him, and I had to crop them because from, you know, waist down, he ain't got a thing on, but he's got a little shirt with short sleeves. And he'd come out, and he started off, he'd walk up to the edge of the helipad, and he'd just sit there and look at the aircraft. And a good share of the time when I went to that one, they wouldn't have me go outside in that, and I'd just sit on the pad. So I wouldn't tie down the rotor blades, I wouldn't do anything, and I'd normally have a book of scripture or a book I want to read in my lower part of my flight suit, and I'd pull it out, and I'd sit there and read a little bit. And this kid would come out, and I'd be watching because somebody's around the helipad, and I'd watch him. And the same kid, he'd come out, and he'd just stand there and watch. So, no, they come out, and he'd get close to me. He'd just sit and look at he'd look at my tail rotor for an hour. I don't know what. One day I picked him up, and I put him in the aircraft. He's sitting right there looking at everything. I put his hand on the stick, and on he'd just look at all. I never saw anybody with such excitement over so little. Just and I've got a picture of him. Like I said, I had to crop it because waist down, not a stitch on, just shirt, bare feet, no hat, no nothing. A little ragamuffin. And I don't know his name, don't know whatever happened to him, don't even know if he survived through, you know, through the siege.
Okay. And one other piece here, let's see, you, when I guess at Phuket, where there was an orphanage, there was also a prison camp?
Oh, in Pleiku.
Yeah, well, that was Pleiku, okay.
There were a couple orphanages we worked with, but there was one in Pleiku. And right next to the orphanage, there was a POW camp. And one night, they attacked the POW camp and tried to get their people freed. Nobody'd leave. A couple nights later, there was another attack, except they mortared the POW camp. And we were afraid because we were, you know, you're base and you're looking out, and it's a couple miles away, and thought they were hitting the orphanage. We were afraid they were going to hit. Well, when you play with mortars, you always joke, you know, it's one over, one under, and you bracket it, and then you hit it. And it's crazier than artillery because, well, the mortars move around. And unless it's danger close, you don't normally start way out and walk it in. And they didn't touch the orphanage. I don't know how or why, or if it was intentional, or just flat dumb luck, but they didn't touch the orphanage. But that was strange. I mean, they attacked the POW camp, they got inside, and they couldn't get their own people to run away. So much for prisoner of war camp and your ideas of stuff like that.
Right.
They wouldn't leave.
And not necessarily dedicated to the communist revolution either at that point.
I don't know. You know, I mentioned earlier that since then I've taken a number of college classes in Far East history and other stuff, and I do believe that our government read the thing entirely wrong. I don't think it had, anyway, for the little guy fighting. You know, if you talk to North and South, the old story is the Northerner asks the Southerner, what are you fighting for? Because most of the guys from the South that fought in the Civil War, barefoot and poor, and they didn't own any slaves. He says, I'm fighting for my rats. He says, I'm fighting because you're down here. And I think most of the Vietnamese didn't understand what the war was about any more than the Americans. I didn't. And I think most of them were fighting because of home or whatever. I know the Vietnamese that were fighting on the south side that were up where I'm at were there predominantly because the judge gave them an opportunity to go to war or go to jail. And I know the ones that my brother-in-law fought with down around Saigon, they lived down there in family, and we're talking full-time soldiers yet though. And he said they were very good, and the ones I was fighting with, you know, that I was dealing with for the most part up around Pleiku, were not. And same war, same people. I think most of the Vietnamese were fighting for unification, and they wanted Vietnam together, one Vietnam. They didn't want French rule, they didn't want American rule, they didn't want any help, they wanted self-rule, they wanted, this is our country, leave us alone. And I think that's what they were, and I think that's probably part of what went on here. You're talking about being dedicated to communism. I don't think they could tell you what communist was, much less spell it.
Right. Okay. Another note here that we have king bees and beetle nut.
Well, that's not all connected, but
okay. Two different things. All right.
Yeah. We were talking about them not fighting and about going out to the field and getting caught in trouble in that. King bees was a CH-34, which is, if you think of the old Marine helicopter you see in Vietnam, has a rotating motor down in the corner. It has a rounded front piece down. Pilots were way above the cargo compartment. King bees had 34s, and they were Vietnamese. And on several occasions, we had run-ins with king bees, and none of them were anything I'd want to write home about. And I remember one night, they had, well, it was daytime when they went up. They went up and inserted Vietnamese, along with our RAO, our forward observer, had put them in, and they got into heavy contact, and they needed to be extracted. And they were sending a bunch of Hueys up to extract them. And I was heading up that way, and I'm in my 58, and the Hueys are going up in formation to go up and try and get them out, and king bees are coming down. And we got this common freak for artillery we've talked about. So they hailed king bees, and king bees come back on the radio, and they says, hey, your people are in trouble. We're going up. Where are you guys going? Oh, we go home. Nighttime, we go home now. Their people were in contact, and we were going up to snatch South Vietnamese out, and these guys are going home. Another time, they were down at Pleiku Air Base, and I mentioned how we had to cross the runway to get in and out of there, and there was a king bee sitting on the VIP pad right in front of the tower, and he called for departure instructions. The tower told him, hold flat pitch, C-130 on landing roll. And he says, my country, I go now. And he just picked up and went right across the runway. The C-130 that was landing, he aborted his landing and gunned it, and, you know, like a touch and go, and went around again and came back. And I'm going, oh, you got to be kidding me. It was just beetle nut. You know what beetle nut is?
I do. But
yeah, but very few people here do. I gather it was a bit addictive, a bit of a mild narcotic, like in Iraq they have trouble with khat. There were a number of things in Vietnam that were easy to get. None of our guys played with beetle nut, but every once in a while you get a mama's son and she'd smile at you, her teeth would be all absolutely black. Beetle nut would stain their teeth, and they'd chew beetle nut, and it's just something that you never see here. But if you're seeing stuff about Vietnam and you see a group, you're going to get somebody in there that's got all them black teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's beetle nut. That's
All right, that was just a thing. And then you've also got something here about Mama San and a tiger.
yeah. I don't even remember which base that was. Mama San. Well, we talk about a housing shortage here. You know, a big house, maybe 8 foot square for the mountain yards, and they build them on stilts, and then you have a ladder you put down. And 8 by 8 probably was a multi-generational domicile. And one of Mama San's duties would be to bring in the ladder at night. And for whatever reason, Mama San didn't bring in the ladder. And in the middle of the night, a tiger walked up the ladder and bit Mama San in the arm and actually bit the arm off. She took the arm out of the tiger's mouth and pulled it away, beat the tiger off, pulled the ladder in. Next morning, walked 7 miles into a mountain yard village.
Wow.
Or into Special Forces camp from her village. They had me medevac her to 71st Evac Hospital. A couple days later, they asked me to pick her up and bring her back out to the mountain yard village, and I did. She walked then back out to her village and sat there for most of the day. Nobody talked to her. They thought she was an evil spirit.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a scratch in the jungle, like from a rose bush, in an hour it'll be a pus track.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the doctor at 71st Evac Hospital, I said, how come she didn't just flat bleed to death?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he says, you would. I would. He says, they don't have any fat. He says, her muscles all contracted and then acted like a tourniquet.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to debride it and whatever and put it. She walked, it was every other day or every third day, 7 miles back to the Special Forces camp to have her dressing changed and looked at.
Wow.
And walked back to her village. But that you talk about differences, and you know, people today are complaining about Obamacare and health care. You see them parading it's a right and stuff. And I do genealogy, and I can tell you that my parents started getting health care because of the unions. And prior to that, nobody had insurance. Doctors did house calls. They did house calls when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
We have no concept how well we lived, how well things are. I was sitting in a master's class, economics, and the gentleman sitting next to me was a retired colonel, Army engineer. And somebody said something about poor in this country. And he and I said, we don't have any poor in this country. 2/3 of the class was black and 2/3 of the class was female. And the class went ballistic. And the prof came back to the two of us and says, "Do you just want to explain?" I says, "Yeah, our poor has transportation. Our poor has housing with electricity. Some of them have air conditioning. Almost all of them have TVs. They have indoor plumbing. They have, you know, they may not have insurance. They can go to any emergency room and get health care." I says, "They live better than the top 10% do in any third world country I've ever been in. We have relative poor. They're poor relative to the rest of us. I'll give you that. But poor? No."
Okay. Now, one other actually dimension of sort of cultural difference and so forth. We talked about R&Rs. You had the one that you went to Japan. Where else did you go?
I went to the Philippines, and that was in conjunction to something else too. And that was early in my stay in Vietnam. I've always had an interest in outdoor survival, backpacking. I mountain climb. I cross-country ski. But when I cross-country ski, I take my pack with me, and I don't come back for a couple days. They sent me to the Philippines to go through jungle environmental survival training at Subic Bay. By the way, it's still there. Subic Bay isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look up JEST, J-E-S-T, Jungle Environmental Survival Training, the same mountain yards are running it, or the same mountain yards, the same Negritos are running it in the same place and doing the same thing for civilians and anybody that wants to go. And I found that fascinating. I was doing some research the other day on the computer, but we went there and 3 days, and then my R&R followed that. So I don't know, I ended up with somewhere between 8 to 10 days they cut my orders for, because I had my 5-day R&R in conjunction with jungle school and travel and housing and everything else. So I went there, and that was interesting. We were told to bring $2.50, and we figured that was just for meals. Everybody I ran into was an officer that was going to the school, and we got there. They had us meet in Subic Bay, told us when and where, got aboard Dusnaf, they put down the side curtains, and they drove us, and you could tell by the road, they got out of the main base, and we were on a gravel road, and it wasn't really well taken care of, and dust starting to seep in a little bit, and got where we were going, there was this big Quonset hut, and we got out and went in the Quonset hut, and we had really professional presentation for the morning and into part of the afternoon, but we never had lunch. Then they finally said, anybody hungry? Duh. So they had us get back aboard Dusnaf, side curtains down, drove us off. Vehicle stopped, and they call off 4 names. Now, I'm real suspicious. Dusnaf's full. Why do they want 4 of us? They're going to feed us, right? So the 4 of us get out, and the Dusnaf leaves. And we're looking around, and it's triple canopy jungle, and there's just this 2-track. And as the truck finally clears, here's standing a little native. And he's got 4 bolo machetes in a wooden sheath with about 6 foot of parachute cord on it. He said, $2.50, please. Okay, we cough up $2.50. He shows us how to tie it around our waist, and it hangs real nice on one side. He draws his, cuts a piece of dry bamboo, splits it down, puts a little V in it, takes another piece and starts playing it like a violin. He starts fire. And he's got a green joint of bamboo, splits that one off, puts a bamboo leaf over top, takes some rice out of his pocket, puts it in the joint, bamboo leaf, puts it in the fire. In about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at the most, that we're from the time we're dropped off, he's taking another piece of bamboo and splitting it lengthwise, and bamboo has these joints in it, you know, and he's splitting it sideways, and it made like a little trough. And he's opening up this thing, and he's putting some rice and other stuff, and he goes. So we sit down there, and we're eating. Don't know what we're eating. Rice, I know. The rest of it, I don't know. So we're eating. And when we get through eating, he goes like this, and he says, then he speaks. The guy actually can speak, and he speaks English. He says, what you see? Well, you know, pilots aren't usually off the farm. So he gets, we're in Sambo country, we're in tiger country. He gets some strange answers. And then he looks at us, and he points again, and he says, look again. You stand in world's largest grocery store. Only reason men starve out here is no read packaging labels. And for the next 3.5 days, everything we wanted was prepared. Everything. We had, at one point, well, the first day, he was showing us medicine. Second day, he's showing us water. I got that out of order. First day was medicine and water. Second day was plants. Third day, he's showing us how to catch animals. And then the next day, we were picked up early in the morning and taken back to base. And culture differences again. I mean, when we're doing the animals, he's upset with us that we want to catch them by the neck. They'll be dead. He says, catch them by the leg. Tie them with a string. Give them water. Eat them when you're ready. Otherwise, famine or feast. He says, dumb. First day, he's showing us where to find water and medicine. One of the guys picked up a piece of bamboo. He struck it with his machete, and it split. And the edge of bamboo, when it splits like that, it's very sharp. And he laid the palm of his hand wide open. Well, I'm a wilderness EMT. And I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, how many stitches? And like I said, a scratch is a pus track. And I'm figuring, this guy's out of here. Ain't no way he's going to perform for the next couple days in the jungle with us with a cut in his palm like that. And I mean, it's clear through the skin. I mean, it's good cut. The greeter goes over to a little tree and uses the knife down by the hilt and just scrapes it and ends up with what looks like kind of a Brillo pad. Puts it in his hand and says, hold it. He goes over and he pulls some leaves off another one, and it milks up on the end like a milkweed. Takes that little Brillo pad out and he paints it with the sap. I noticed by this time the wound's over 3/4 of the way closed. Puts the bark back. He says, hold it. It never opened up. It never got infected. When we got back to base, I went with this guy over to the aid station. And they're looking at it and says, what's that crap you got in there? Because by now it's scabbed over some and that. And he said, well, I don't know. And the Negritos did that. Oh, you're with the JUST program. Yeah. They paint it with that white stuff? We says, yeah. He says, you know, we're testing that stuff in the lab back here. It's got the same medicinal effects as iodine. We're trying to figure out how much to use to purify water. We're going, what? He says, don't know what to do with it. He says, if it opens up, come back. Anything we do now would be secondary injury. He says, it's closed. It ain't going to open. I'm going, whoa, okay. Last night we were out. The Negrito got together somehow out there in the middle of nowhere. Of course, these guys, I mean, they grew up out there. This is their thing. Come to find out, the guys we're with have got college degrees. But you know, you went, I mean, they were wearing fatigues, jungle fatigues. A couple of them had some sort of footwear on. Some of them were barefoot. If they had anything on their back, it was smaller than a book bag, and their machete. And I mean, we didn't go without anything. I mean, at one point, the guys were swimming in a bend in a river, and they were commenting how, yeah, they weren't dirty, but they felt sticky. And when the greeter goes over and he cuts this vine, and it was all twisted. And he says, get a rock and pound it flat. So we get 2 rocks, pound this thing flat. He says, go wash like wash rag. Get in the and it lathered up like it was detergent. Washed with it, couldn't. This is wild. Getting all clean. Just so last night, all these guys kind of start getting together, and everybody that's in the class ended up in the same campground. And we found out top of the hill right there is where Deucenav had a road again, and we went out the next day. But that night, we all got together, and they said, you know, we know we're going back to combat. Anything you guys want to know? And we says, well, yeah. Anything you can't get for us here. I mean, we're mesmerized. I mean, there's stuff in medicine. Where to find water. I mean, they were showing us a number of plants that all we had to do is cut them and water ran out of them. And it's purified. We were just mesmerized with everything that was going on. And you can't absorb it fast enough. But a lot of it's the same. I mean, if you see a dandelion here, it's a dandelion there. It may be bigger, but it's still a dandelion. So some of this stuff washes over. And some of that I picked up real easy. Well, we're sitting around this campfire and I ask him, and he says anything. So he says, 2 things no can get. He says, okay. No San Miguel tree. Well, San Miguel is Philippine beer. He's talking about no Coors, no Budweiser, no Falstaff, you know. No San Miguel tree. And no sex tree. But other than that, anything and everything we wanted out there. I mean, it was just unbelievable, the stuff that, if I sit and think about it, I'll think of some more examples of stuff they come up with, but it was just, we wanted for literally nothing. As a matter of fact, it was strange. I woke up the morning they were going to take us out. We had learned to take a piece of bamboo and you hit it with your machete to the outside. You pull that little piece of wood out. Bamboo joint's about 1/3 full of water and it's already purified. And we'd put some freshwater prongs in there and we'd put some palm heart in there and some other things, and then you put this piece of wood back in upside down, and you put it in the fire, and it acts like a pressure cooker. The water only gets so hot, and the little piece of wood comes up, and you see some steam come out. And when steam don't come out anymore, you know everything's in there's cooked. And I had one of these I'd saved. And I woke up, and it rained real hard the night before. And we were starting to get into the monsoons. And I had a rock that was probably 5 foot high. And we were near a creek, and the creek had come up and completely surrounded my rock, but it hadn't got up to the top of me. And I had slept with my legs drawn up in my chest with my poncho over me, and I had this joint. When I woke up in the morning, I hit that joint, I flipped it on the side, and I'm eating a little rice and palm heart and some prongs and thinking, life just don't get any better than this. And they took us back to base, and then I realized this is Thanksgiving. So we went and showered, because we'd been, several days in the same clothes, and I went and showered and changed clothes, and went down to the BOQ, and they had table after table after table laid out with roast beef and ham and turkey and chicken and everything you could think of laid out. And I went through, and the contrast, again, talking about poor and talking about the way we live. And matter of fact, just recently I was listening to a documentary, and the guy was making the comment, and I never thought about it at the time, and I never thought about it causing a problem, but he says part of the problem our troops had with the Vietnamese that we were working with was the difference in life standards in our culture. And this idea of poor and the way we lived and our housing and their housing and what we ate and the way they ate, and coming back out of the field and thinking I was living like a king, and then walking back and a 4th of July don't go by that I don't think about the way the Montagnards lived and the way the Negritos lived and the way the Vietnamese lived, and just so thankful that this country, and we have so much excess that we don't even think it's excess. I mean, it just...
All the road. All right. Now, did you have another R&R in there? Or actually, before we get to that, actually, so you go back, you're at Subic Bay, you have Thanksgiving dinner and so forth, but did you then have a few days at Subic Bay before you left, or?
Actually, we flew into Clark.
Okay.
And then we were overland to Subic. That was a shocking experience, too. You've been in the military long enough, especially in combat. You learn to sleep whenever you get a chance to sleep, and you learn to eat even if you're not hungry, even when there's a chance to eat, because, well, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when it's going to be able to get the next meal or drink of water or whatever. And it was night, and we got aboard this bus, Army bus, typical gray-blue kind of looking thing, and they're going to take us to the next place. And, of course, this is the Philippines, and we came out of Vietnam, so we don't have our guns. We don't have our survival vests. We don't have anything like that. And you got whatever you're traveling with, whether it's a B-4 bag or a small duffel or whatever you're traveling with. And we get aboard the bus, and we're traveling, and I'm asleep. And the bus comes to a stop, and I thought, oh, we're where we're going. And I look up, and there's guys coming on the bus in some sort of military uniform. And if I remember, it was a grayish-blue uniform. It wasn't one of ours. Automatic weapons, and I'm feeling for my sidearm. We were at a checkpoint, and they vary them and move them around, but the Philippines were having trouble with Hucks at the time. And they were coming aboard to make sure that these were all Americans on, and this hadn't been a hijacked bus, and there weren't Hucks aboard the bus. And they just kind of walked down and looked around and walked off, and we were on our way. But that was a few tenths, and I could see it in the eyes of some of the other guys that were there on the bus too. Now, whether they were out of Vietnam or where they were, I don't know. But yeah, that was different. Yeah, I had 5 days. Subic Bay was interesting. They had a great big officers club, and it was divided, sort of an upstairs, downstairs thing. And the upstairs was very formal, and it was very semicircular, and it kept going down steps like you have at somebody's home for a
Mhm.
fireplace, but everything in front of you is glass. And you can see the whole bay. And there was a carrier group in there at that time, amongst other things, and you can see them all out in the bay. And the lights are down, so the outside's lit up. And all the way at the bottom of this setup, now these are all tables on these tiers. And at the bottom is a dance floor and a piano, and a singer comes out from time to time. And several us guys would go down close to the piano and sit down there. And we'd request songs, and that was strange. People just weren't doing that. And we finally got a glass and put it on the piano and started stuffing bills in it. That was strange. Nobody was doing it. And we asked the gal there to sing a couple songs. She didn't know them. And the last night we were there, she knew it was going to be our last night. She got her girlfriend to come over from the NCO club to sing the songs we'd requested that she didn't know. And then she said that she wanted to do a dedication and that her brothers were leaving, referring to us. And she started to try and sing her song, got partway through. Had to put the mic down, she couldn't finish. She turned around and collected herself and turned around and tried 3 times. And then just walked away. We never got that response home.
Mm-hmm.
Never got it anywhere but there. I mentioned you had the upstairs, downstairs, and if you went outside and you went down below, this was on the side of a hill, down below they had a stag bar.
Mm-hmm.
And just the opposite, there was no glass. It had 1/4-inch hardware cloth on the wall, and then mosquito netting on the outside of the hardware cloth. And you walk inside, and I think there were 2 tables, and I don't remember how many stools, but there couldn't have been more than 4 stools in the entire place. But there were a couple tables, and they were pillar type where you stand up by, in a bar. And down there was a big open patio, and there was a swimming pool out there. And at night, nobody was using the swimming pool, but there were tracks that came from that bar, went across that patio, and went to the swimming pool. And inside, they had Last Chance, big plaque on the wall, Last Chance, and there were names on it. And they had this car, and it was inside the bar, and they'd open this door, slide the curtains back, whatever, and this car kind of looked like a bullet, pointed on both ends. And you could sit in the car, and there was a seat, and they had a lever, and when you pulled the lever, it dropped a hook. And just before the pool, there was a cable, and on both sides of the cable, there was a ramp coming up to that cable. You get in the car, and they'd pump up the air pressure, and when the gauge read a certain point, they'd say, "You ready? Ready?" They'd fire the car, and they'd go down the track. And you could drop the hook to catch the cable, and if you didn't, you went in the swim pool.
All right, so I guess it answers the question of what do you do in Subic Bay if you're not getting yourself in trouble?
Well, at that time, we had more Army aviators on the Last Chance plaque than the Navy did. Mm-hmm. So it was funny. I went out with the guys one night, and they wanted me to go in town with them, and I knew what they were thinking, and I wasn't really excited.
Mm-hmm.
They conned me into going in town, and I went in town. We went into a bar. Of course, the girls descend on you then. And, baby, you're nice. I like you. I don't want to marry you. I don't know if it was resonating, but then somebody else came in the bar, and she didn't really want to be with him, but he was buying her drinks. The 2 guys that were with me, the 2 gals that were with them, I says, "What's the deal?" And they said, "Oh, he weirdo. He likes to hurt girls. He burns them with cigarettes and stuff." And I says, "What? Well, why doesn't she just leave him alone?" "Oh, he buys her drinks. She's got to stay with him." "What?" "Well, that's the bar rules. That's the way things go." Now, she wasn't really getting a drink. She's getting tea.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a drink, but it's not, you know. And I got to check my drinks because I can order an orange juice and I'll get a screwdriver. And I got to be real careful what I'm getting because I don't drink. And you tell them what you want, but you don't get it. And so finally I just said, 2. And the bartender looks at me, 2 drinks for her. So she had to come over and sit with me. And I kept buying her drinks until he left. And then I just told her, sorry, babe, you know, I'm not that interested. Well, they stayed there till the bar closed, and the girls left with us, and we're walking down the street. And these guys want to take these 2 gals to the hotel, and ain't interested. These 2 ain't going to go unless she goes. Guys, come on, you're digging me in. I don't want this trash.
Mm-hmm.
So we end up at the hotel. I tried getting 2 rooms. Can't get 2 rooms, so I get 1 room with 2 beds. I told her, you stay there, me stay here. Savvy? And she woke me up in the morning, and I run her out. The following day, early in the morning, the room in my BOQ opens up. My maid's letting her in. She just sits there in the chair, watching me. And I'm not indicating I'm awake. I'm just... Finally, I says, what do you think you're doing? And she apologizes to me, and I didn't get my money's worth, and she feels bad. And I'm going, what? And I figure somebody's going to try and take me for a ride. But she ends up being a #1 genuine article.
Mm-hmm.
So I used her for 2 or 3 days. She arranged to pay Mama Son, so she's mine. She doesn't go into work. She doesn't go anywhere. And she was my guide around Subic Bay. And outside Subic, if you go up to the base, they'd have places where they had felt canvases out where you could buy carvings, you could buy stuff like that. I made some comment to her one time I wanted to buy one of them. She says, no, you don't. She says, they crooks. I take you. So she got one of the jitneys, and the jitney is a Jeep over there, and they decorate them with all sorts of big reflectors and lights and all kinds of stuff and use them like taxis. And she gets this jitney, and she speaks, I don't know what the language is, but it's not Spanish. And she's speaking to the driver, and he takes me somewhere on the way back roads. I don't know where the devil I am, and I'm looking around going, okay, so far she's being good to me, and I trust her. And she goes in this place, and for $5, I bought a carving of the Last Supper that's this big, in multiple woods. I walked out of there with 3 oil paintings, and I paid $5. Couldn't believe it. Another night, I told her, I says, let's go eat and dance somewhere. Well, she's thinking I want to take her back to the officers' club. Well, they ain't gonna let her in. And so she says, I know the place. And she took me someplace again, and it's downstairs, and it's like old caverns, like you think of in France and that, you know. And I'm going, oh shit. And I get in there, and we had surf and turf, and I don't remember what else. I didn't even spend $7. I mean, it was just that way. And one day I says to her, I says, I want to see where you live. And she looks at me funny like, I says, you tell me you got a child. I says, I want to meet your family. And she looked at me and she started to cry, and she says, I know have family. I says, what? I know have family. She says she was a maid on the base, and there was a specialist there, E4, that she fell for, and he said, if you love me, you're going to go to bed with me. And she believed that he wanted to marry her, and she ended up with a child. And he left and went back to the States, and she got left. Her family, real strict religious, disowned her. Her daddy literally put a stone in the cemetery for her. She ain't alive. She had this jitney take me, and I don't know where we went, but it ended up being 3 or 4 floors. And it's the kind of thing you see on travel logs where you see all the balconies and all the laundry hung from side to side and all over. And we get there, and the driver says something to her. And she starts a fight with the driver. And I'm ready to crawl under anything to get out of the way. People are coming out on the balconies. They're coming out on the street. I mean, they're like lining up 5 to 10 deep around this jitney. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, I'm in big trouble now, you know. I have no clue what's going on. And she and he are in a heated yelling match. Finally, she throws some coins at him, and at that point, everybody around us and in the balconies just start applauding. And her name was Amy. And I said to Amy, I says, what's going on? He tried to charge you way much. He crook. I call him crook. He insists I pay her. He called police. I told him, call the Army. She didn't care. And she had it out because, you know, people over there, they haggle for everything. Mm-hmm. And the Americans, the way we are, like at the front gate, I'd have paid probably somewhere between 40 and 50 bucks for the stuff I got for $5. Mm-hmm. No. Says, he got paid fair. He got paid tip, too much. So him crook. Whoa! And I went in this apartment complex, and she had a, I don't know, 1 or 2 year old, and she was living with 2, 3 other girls so they could afford the rent. Mm-hmm. And that was her life. And she's another person I've often wondered about what happened, because Clark Air Force Base, the volcano took over, and then Subic we pulled out of, and there's nothing there. And she has no family. She has no... And are people going to reprisal against her? I wonder about our maids in Pleiku. Mm-hmm. Was there reprisal against them because they work for the Americans?
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Now, we've been running here for about 3 hours.
You want me to do it again?
Well, you have other. Well, I think what I'd like to do here. I mean, we've actually worked pretty well through the list of things that we had out of Vietnam between the first session and this one. We've covered a wide range of experiences that you had out there, and then you've also mentioned that now, when you finally got short, your commander basically wouldn't even let you fly. So you had kind of a quiet time there.
Well, I think he was worried. I mean, I'd done a tour and a half, back to back, in country, and everybody else is there for a year, whatever. Special Forces do a 6-month tour. They usually do 6 months and rotate it out, and come back for 6 months and rotate it out. And I'd been there for 18, and I'd been made the executive officer of the aviation company and making all the briefings. And I don't know if he knew I flew the little girl to the Mountain Yard Village. I don't care if he does or not. I know he doesn't know I snapped Alert Patrol out. They knew something, because I brought in and showed you, they gave me the award of the Red Banana. Doesn't mean anything to anybody before or after, and nobody else will probably know. But artillery colors are red, and bananas grow predominantly in the highlands. And they had come up with this award they gave once a month from the group headquarters to the officer that they thought was the most valuable player, like a VIP award. And they always gave it to an artillery-rated officer. I'm a warrant. I'm not an artillery-rated officer. I'm not in the artillery branch. They gave it to me. I mean, I went up to the old man's briefing like I did every morning, and there were times when they gave away, good term, they presented medals, and I have a drawer full of them because my mother rescued them out of the trash. And I don't think anything of any of them I've got, not a one. The award of the red banana, I had no clue it was coming. I had no idea what was going on. Again, it was a typical, everybody stand up, attention, attention to orders. And they started reading it, and they ordered me to the front. I had no clue. I think I was awarded it in November. I'd have to look at it. But it means something. Those were the guys I worked with. Those were the guys I was accounting to, I guess. But again, it's strange because my sidekick that I mountain climb and backpack and go deer hunting with and that, he served with 1st Cavalry Division. And he goes to their reunions. And he says to me, you want to join the Vietnam Helicopters Association? I didn't work with those guys. Do I go to 52nd Arty groups or 1st Field Forces group? I didn't really work with them. I mean, I might fly a guy once and then never see him again. Some of the commanders, I might fly once, twice, 3 times a week. They might have been there 3, 4 months and then they're gone. Because you got that rotation thing going on. I did come home from deer hunting one year, and my wife says, we've got a strange phone call. Well, I was law enforcement. The only thing I could think of at the time was, oh, time to keep the scatter gun loaded and you know, make sure the dog's taken care of. And she says, no, no. She says, told me to tell you it was Sundown 13 Alpha. And I looked at her and I says, who? Couldn't believe my ears. Our mechanics decided to add Alpha to the end of our call signs. This was my mechanic. My mechanic, again, was a misfit. I guess that's what I was. He, a little heavy, really nice guy, real nice personality, just didn't fit with the other guys, and he was the one they'd pick on. And, well, I'd pick on him too, but he knew, you know, I mean, like we'd fly, later on we got some flight suits that were 2-piece. They were like tanker uniforms. So you had a tunic and a pair of pants. And we would tuck them in, because if you didn't and you got an aircraft fire, it acted like a Venturi, and it'd pull the fire up. And they were teasing him one night about being gay and stuff, and I got to the door and I said, hey, Mick, good night. And, you know, frogging around. But Miklos and I got along well, and he became my mechanic. And I don't care. I mean, my faith, I'll talk about gays in a minute. My faith, if you're gay, that's your problem. That's the way I look at it. And I think it is. I think you got enough problems of your own. And as long as you're not predatory, and I think that your sexual conquests with the ladies or with your wife or with some other partner is your business, not to stay your business, and doesn't belong in public. So I don't care. None of my business. And I tried to teach Mick to fly. That boy couldn't get the hang of it. He tried killing me more than the Viet Cong did. And he told my wife, he says, I extended to stay in Vietnam because your husband was the only one that would let me fly. And Mick extended to stay. I found out about this after he did it. He extended to stay in Vietnam 6 months because I did. I went to Mick, I said, what did you just do? You're dumb. You know, he wasn't going to get sent back that we knew of. Matter of fact, they sent him to Germany when he left there. He never did go back to Vietnam. I said, you don't extend because I do. You don't live your life the way I do because you're doing it for you. You do what fits your bill. You do what floats your boat. You don't, you know. That bothered me for a while. When I went down to see him in Cleveland, I talked to him on the phone. We got back together. This is 40 years later. Went down to Cleveland. He's total disability. He had to get he took privately his own fat samples and sent them to a private lab to have them analyzed, and he's heavily exposed to Agent Orange. He later went back by the Freedom of Information Act and got verified. They sprayed the hill in Pleiku that we lived on 6 times while we were there. Forget the free fire zones where nothing grows for 1,000 yards, where they kill it with something, and we're landing in that. You know, I knew I was exposed. It didn't take a rocket scientist to tell me that some reason something isn't growing out there in triple canopy jungle. Spray the hill we lived on? I can remember when they did it, it had a sort of a urine-y, I don't know how to explain the smell. And I can remember them spraying, and I thought they were spraying for mosquitoes. It just sort of fit. I mean, rice paddies all around our base. And I thought maybe they were spraying for mosquitoes. And they sprayed our hill for some, I have no clue why. To this day, I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. Sounds like I'm lying to you. He threw the they sprayed the hill 6 times while we were there. And yet they asking him, do you think you're exposed?
Oh, all right. I'm going to wind back around here. So you kind of got, so then was he there the full time you were there, or did they send him off after
Almost
he
all the time I was there. I don't recall him not being there.
Okay.
I don't recall me being there before he was, or he being there after, or me going, you know, he going home and then I go home later.
Okay.
I know he extended after I did, so I think he stayed another month.
All right.
But why, I can tell you what, he could check out the hooches on both sides of the runway, because we start hovering and he'd end up on both sides of the runway before I took the aircraft away from him. He had fun.
All right. I think we were probably at this point kind of getting to, this is about as far as I go effectively. I think we're going to close this off here, and if we've got more to cover, then we get to do another session.
Well, I'll talk with my wife and we'll see if she comes up with something. You know, so much of it, I don't know. I don't live in the past. I live today. When I was on the police department, there were some guys who their whole life was when they were in high school and played football. And Vietnam was a time that I wouldn't trade it for $1 million. You couldn't get me to do it again for anything. When I came home and I went to the VFW, I was there about the 3rd time, and some guy made the crack, you're the guys that can't win the war. And I grabbed him and bent him over the bar backwards. Told him he was a dumb SOB. And I told him, I said, if we're told to attack, you charge. You're told to retreat, you back up. You're told to sit and hold the ground to the last man, you sit and hold the ground to the last man. We ain't never lost a major battle. Politicians giving the damn war away, and you're blaming us? And I walked out, never been back. I went to a powwow, and it was in conjunction with Purple Heart Association up in White Cloud. And I know a bunch of them. My wife, while I was serving in Vietnam, was serving with VISTA, and she was helping to organize the American Tribal Council. So we've connections on both sides. We'd taken our kids at one time up to Big Bay for a powwow. Big Bay's north of Marquette, and the road literally ends at Big Bay. And before they started the powwow, I'm going to get choked up. They got on their PA system and they asked for all veterans to please come to the PA. It's a real small powwow. There were more of us European mongrels than Native Americans there. Short while they came back on the PA and they said, I didn't ask for just Native American veterans. I know there's more veterans here. I want all the veterans to come over here. So I went over there. They gave me the American flag, gave us the tobacco, told us about their ceremony and why. We went out and danced around, and I thought, good, this is done. He then asked us to stop and face the outside of the circle. He told them we were the modern-day warriors. We were the ones that protected their freedom and their right to worship, had their powwows. They have a word for thank you, Smegwitch. Want them to come out, shake our hands. Tell Smegwitch. They had everybody come out. It would have been easier to fly into a hot LZ. I stood there, just solidly crying. This powwow, they did almost the same thing, except they didn't have everybody come out and shake our hand, which is good, because I couldn't have taken it. The guy from the VFW up there was out parading with us, and he was in TW's stuff, light tan uniform. That's a twill, a tight weave. And I told him it was an impressive uniform. I asked him about it. He says he was with the VFW up there. And I said, and I grew up running around through White Cloud, Fremont, Newaygo. I went to school in Ferris, lived in Muskegon. So I dated, matter of fact, gal I was engaged to lived in White Cloud. That's how I ended up getting the service. And he invited me, and he told me that they met at the senior citizens, I don't know what you call it, building. So I went the first Monday of the month there, and there were like 12 guys. And their talk, first thing when they got into new business, anybody needs help. They had read the statement from the VFW that we're here to support the troops, to support our vets, to support our widows and our orphans. Does anybody need help? You know, I know from being a medic and being a police officer and served in the military, they are not going to ask for help. And these guys are going down the list of people they know in their own community. There's like 12 of them, and they come up with 6 people that really need help, and their group's going to be helping them. And this VFW's meeting, and there's no bar. You don't need a gas mask. There's a couple of them that are smoking, but I mean, you don't need a gas mask. They meet once a month to take care of their own and look after the rest, and this isn't a bunch sharing old war stories or puffing chests, or matter of fact, you got to go looking to find out. In I dare say probably half of that group are Purple Hearts. Found a group I can join.
All right. I think that probably gives us a good spot to close this session on. So again, thank you very much. You have had just a tremendous amount of material to share, and hope we can arrange to get more of it in the future. But thank you.
You're welcome.